Hello, dear viewers. Support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it. And also, make sure you comment your thoughts. Now let's start the video. Sansa had no desire to unpack her trunks once she was moved to Tyrion's chambers after their marriage. Instead, she left most of her things alone, instructing Shae to not touch them. The few things she was allowed to keep from her Stark heritage were in her trunks, a few forgotten hair baubles, or the doll her father bought her before his imprisonment, or a swath of stark gray fabric she ripped from a dress. However, things weren't too bad with Tyrion. They didn't share a bed, he didn't demand kisses or attention from her, and for the most part, they dined together at night to avoid Cersei and Joffrey's malicious eyes and the loud whispers of ridicule from the court when they were forced to attend. It was like having a friend. No, Sansa shook her head. It's like having an ally, and that is it. A month into their marriage, or whatever it was, passing as, Sansa and Tyrion had fallen into the habit of breaking their fast in their chambers and then going their separate ways, Tyrion off into the library, or some duty with Bronn as he attempted to make sense of things, as master of the coin, and Sansa to hide in their chambers with her embroidery, or with Margaery Tyrell and the Tyrell contingent who had come to King's Landing. This morning was different, however. A Lannister guard stood outside their chambers, eyeing Bronn with ill-concealed dislike. "What is it?" asked Tyrion, as he had opened the door, ready to leave that morning for his tasks. He was looking back and forth between the two. "His Grace King Joffrey I requires your presence," announced the Lannister guard with a distinct sniff to his tone. "Along with your wife." Tyrion stared at the guard for a little longer before dipping his head in a slow nod. "I see." He turned his head and called back into his chambers. "Sansa, it appears that my dear nephew is requesting us." Sansa's hands shook, but she pulled the sleeves of her dress down and fussed with them for a moment to hide her nerves. "Of course, my lord," she demurred, lowering her eyes and falling into step beside Tyrion, with Bronn at their heels. The guard brought them to the small council. Tyrion scowled as he realized that he, as the master of coins, was the last to the room, filled already with not only Joffrey and Cersei, but also Varys, Pycelle, Littlefinger, and his father. Tywin was reading over notes, his remaining eye moving quickly across the parchment, a small smile on his thin lips. On his other side, Joffrey was nearly preening, and Cersei's expression was full of amused malice, peering at them from behind her wine. Sansa eased into the room, trying to remain as small as possible, and Tyrion did not blame her in the least for doing so. Instead, he swallowed and quipped loudly. Drawing attention to him, "Killed a few puppies today. Nephew, puppies would be a step up from those kittens, and you're looking rather pleased with yourself." Even the insult couldn't wipe the smile from Joffrey's face, and Tyrion's heart started to beat against his ribs as his nephew gleefully instructed, "Go on, grandfather, show him." Tyrion turned with dread towards his father, who glanced up and silently handed Tyrion the parchment he was reading from. Tyrion looked at the small paper, frowning as he read it aloud. "We have reached the summit of our plans. Although some left early, the Freys are prepared for winter with a wolf pelt due to generous gold donations. Signed, Walder Frey." Tyrion looked up. "Is this supposed to mean something?" The glee in Joffrey's voice when he replied had Tyrion glance at Sansa in concern. "Robb Stark has been defeated, and his bitch mother..." Sansa paled. Tyrion carefully folded the small parchment and placed it on the table in front of him. "Defeated? How so?" But Joffrey had continued, "Write back to Lord Frey, thank him for his service, and command him to send Robb Stark's head to me. I'm going to serve it to Sansa at my wedding feast." Tyrion moved quickly to Sansa's side as she swayed, but as soon as his hand touched hers, she stood straight and stared ahead, her blue eyes focused on the far wall. "Your Grace," interjected Varys, shocked. "Lady Sansa is your aunt, by marriage." Cersei's smile was a slippery thing as she tried to soothe the faux pas. A joke. Joff did not mean it. Joffrey scowled at his mother, the two golden-haired Lannisters with matching green eyes glaring at one another. "Yes, I did. I'm going to have it served to Sansa at my wedding feast." Tyrion found himself quickly losing what little patience he had for his family. "No." Joffrey, Cersei, and even Tywin turned to look at Tyrion. "No?" echoed Cersei, flabbergasted. "Did you just tell your king no?" Tyrion stared at his family and then turned back to the rest of the small council, dismissing his sister. Again, how was the Stark army defeated? Defeated, by the way, nephew, is not the same as dead. Joffrey scowled and purpled in rage, but Varys was quick to interject and hopefully diffuse the situation. Ah yes, excellent point, Lord Tyrion. My little birds tell me that Lord Frey was not quite as successful as he claims. Joffrey's ire swung to the spymaster. Oh, he ground out petulantly. But the letter... "Can you lie, your grace," finished Varys smoothly. "From what I've been told, Robb Stark, along with a significant portion of his army, managed to escape." Silence fell in the room, and Tyrion glanced quickly at Sansa to see her wipe the tiny upturn of her lips from her face. "What did you say?" Joffrey's voice had gone low, trembling with his rage. He turned to his grandfather. What overinflated sense of ego did Frey think he was presenting, sending that note to us when it barely tells the truth? How did he muck up your plan so thoroughly that he could not even bring me Robb Stark's head? Tywin's own matching glower set, Tyrion's senses on alert. I shall find out shortly. He turned to Varys. What do you know for certain? Varys pursed his lips, and then folded his hands into the voluminous sleeves of his yellow robes. Robb Stark escaped through the use of his mouth turned down magic, aided by the witch in his camp. Several others of high rank escaped with them, as well as those who survived the attack inside and outside the twins. However, there were also highborn captives, many of Stark's personal guard, and of course, Lady Stark herself. Joffrey leaned back, somewhat mollified. Ah, yes, the wolf pelt. His eyes cut to Sansa. Her head will do just as well. Littlefinger bowed his head, bringing his hands up to steeple in front of his face as he eyed the king and Cersei, but said nothing. Tyrion had enough. Sansa is no longer yours to torment, he paused. Your grace. Sansa turned to Tyrion in surprise, but the shorter man was staring at his nephew, something burning in his eyes that Joffrey could not see or recognize. Everyone is mine to torment. You do well to remember that, you little monster. Tyrion rolled his eyes. Oh, I'm the monster. Perhaps you should speak to me more softly, then. Monsters are dangerous. Cersei shot to her feet, her goblet of wine sloshing over. Are you threatening the king? The weaselly man finally spoke, his voice honeyed. Perhaps Lord Tyrion could apologize. He is clearly worried about the well-being of his gentle wife, who did just learn that her mother, and might I add, a dear friend of mine growing up at River Run, died. Life, I would accept such an apology from a bitter dwarf, scoffed Joffrey, tossing his head back. I am the king. I decide who lives and dies, and no one, not even you, uncle, can speak to me the way you do. Sansa watched as Tywin mentally sighed. There was a slight tilt to his head and a brief flutter of his remaining eyelid, and then the tall, imposing man, very much so, now with his eye patch, stood to his full height and snapped, Any man who must say, I am the king, is no true king. I am the king by right of birth, retorted Joffrey. Varys, Pycelle, and Littlefinger all found reasons to look away as the conversation descended into family squabbling. A crown is inherited, said Tywin firmly, but a kingdom is earned. And I have seen little of you earning anything, boy. Joffrey's impossible rage turned to his grandfather, and Sansa felt herself relax a minute amount. Enough that Tyrion felt her hand unclench from under his... My father won the real war. He killed Prince Rhaegar. He took the crown, while you hid under Casterly Rock. She hid a wince from behind her placid expression. That won't go over well, she thought with a sigh. Tywin turned to his daughter, who met his gaze with slightly fearful eyes. The king is tired. See him to his chambers. What? Cersei nodded and turned to her son. Come along. At the door, Joffrey's two Kingsguard, Trent and Moore, stood straight while Joffrey stared incredulously at those in the room. I'm not tired. Cersei tried again, cajoling Joffrey to stand. We have so much to celebrate, my love. A wedding to plan as well. You must rest. No! I am the king. You can't put me to bed like I am Tommen. Tywin reached up to run a finger along the underside of his eye patch. Grand Maester, perhaps some essence of nightshade to help him sleep. Pycelle nodded and stiffly got to his feet, shuffling out the small council while Cersei looped her arm through Joffrey's and held him in place as she began moving him towards the door as well. But I'm not tired, the king nearly wailed. Tyrion remained staring at his father, who busied himself looking over several letters on the table in front of him, while Littlefinger kept his eyes on Sansa, who did her best to ignore him. Varys sat serenely, his eyes looking out a far window in the small council room. Only once Joffrey's voice trailed away did Tyrion turn to look at Sansa. "My lady," he said courteously, causing her to look at him. "Perhaps Bronn can escort you back to our chambers." He then glanced at his father. If that was all, of course. Tywin nodded. Sansa dipped into a curtsy, and Bronn, who had been hovering, although he certainly didn't look like he was, by the door, nodded once at Tyrion and then fell into step on Sansa's right, leading her from the small council. As she left, the door remained open for a few moments, and she could hear the conversation start up again, but only in snatches. Sona's statement. Joffrey is...
The crown. Power?
No, armies. Robb Stark. Do you disapprove? This is war. To slaughter. Peace. My lady. Sansa mentally cursed herself for focusing so hard on the conversation between Tyrion and Tywin that she lost herself, following Bronn down the hall as her feet automatically took her to safety in her bedchambers. My apologies, Sir Bronn, she murmured. He sighed. It's fine. They walked to her chambers in silence, and once they were at the door, Bronn opened it and swept inside to check for any dangers, as Tyrion had previously instructed him to do. Finding none, he stepped aside for Sansa to enter. She did so, and then stopped. My mother is dead, she thought, and now that she was safe in her room, with only Bronn to see her, she allowed some of the shaking to emerge from the numbness of the knowledge that her brother and mother were attacked under guest rights. There is no hope left, she muttered. What? Twirling, she plastered a fake smile on her lips and laced her fingers together in front of her dress. Sir Bronn, nothing at all. I was just remembering something that I need to ask Shay about later. I will be fine now, Sir. You have seen me safely back to my bedchambers, as my lord husband asked. Bronn eyed her suspiciously, but then he shrugged and left, firmly shutting the door behind him. As he did so, Sansa felt her legs shake, and she barely made it the next few steps over to collapse on a chair near the fireplace. Mother, she let her face fall into her hands as her shoulders shook. Robb, Sansa in the chair by the fireplace for some time, crying and letting her own fears and worries about remaining in King's Landing. The terror and fear she constantly felt, even when Cersei and Joffrey's eyes were no longer on her, mingle with her despair that Robb was not riding south for her, that her mother was dead. What happened to Arya? Why am I the only one left? Her eyes, red and puffy, glanced up at the ceiling. Are the gods punishing me for being a silly and stupid little girl? Eventually, the sun that lit the chambers began to sink, and shadows lengthened and spread from the open window across the room, leaving one of the few sunspots by the foot of the bed where her childhood tokens remained, unpacked. I am never gonna leave this place alive, she whispered fearfully, staring at it. We should never have gone south. Stark's going south means death. She rose shakily to her feet and then fell to the floor in front of the trunk, her shaking hands reaching out at the clasps, but hesitating before she flipped them up. But you're no longer a Stark, you're a Lannister now. A small voice piped up in her head, and with that, she flipped the locks and shoved the trunk's lid up, staring down at the shallow shelf that held the tiny doll her father gave her, its dress stained and smelling musty. She gently shifted it aside and found the ripped wool of a gray Stark dress. Something caught the last of the sunlight, and Sansa squinted as the beam reflected and hit her full in the face. She moved her head to the side, her long red hair spilling out over her shoulder from the intricate braids Shay had done earlier, and leaned forward, shifting a bit of the fabric away. That strange mirror from before the Battle of Blackwater twinkled back at her, the strange message on folded parchment tucked into the corner of the frame. Sansa pulled the paper free and reread the message she knew by heart, for its strangeness burned itself in her memory. Speak the name of your family and it shall be heard, she muttered aloud. Her lips then twisted into a small, bitter smile. What family? My parents are dead. Robb is... who knows? Bran and Rickon are dead. She sighed and scooped the mirror up, holding it with one hand and the note with the other as she stood and began to walk back towards the fireplace. Why did I even keep this? She asked aloud, shaking her head. At first you were a sign that someone was coming for me, and I held out on hope, but no one is coming for me now. I am a wolf without my pack, and the lone wolf dies. She tossed the note into the fire, watching as it curled along the edges, turning black and quickly disappeared, turning into ash. She looked back down at the mirror. "I wish I could be brave," she muttered. "Maybe then I wouldn't be so scared of everyone." After a moment, she let out a tiny laugh under her breath. "If you were in my place, I doubt you'd be scared, Arya." She put the mirror down on the side table beside the chair and moved away, ready to summon Shay to change into her nightdress. Her trusted friend appeared with some finger food for Sansa's bird-like appetite, and after she had removed the braids from her hair and helped Sansa out of the complicated dresses the women in King's Landing favored, Sansa found herself alone once more and staring at her reflection in the glass. The girl who looked back was tall and willowy, paler than she had ever been in the North, with long, gleaming red hair. However, her long face was solemn and her cheeks were becoming hollow. Not from a lack of sleep or appetite, but from her shedding her baby fat as her curves slowly widened and her waist tapered in. More eyes would be on her the longer she remained in King's Landing and grew into a woman's body, and soon Tyrion would not be able to protect her. She had no one she could count on but herself. "Be brave," she whispered to the sad-eyed young woman in the glass. "Be brave like Arya Stark. You can survive here. Keep your head down, your mouth shut, and never ever forget what they did." She met the blue eyes of her reflection and whispered fiercely, "The North remembers." "Damn right it does," piped Arya's voice. Sansa whirled and her eyes darted around the empty bedchambers, looking into the shadows at the corners. She eased forward, away from the glass, and then sunk to her knees, looking under the bed. It was empty except dust balls. "Arya?" whispered Sansa, a desperate feeling like hope bubbling up in her. "No, it's Nymeria." Her sister's voice sighed, and Sansa could picture her rolling her gray eyes and scoff as she said next, "Of course it's me, stupid." "Arya!" thought Sansa, excitement growing. "Where are you?" "The mirror." Sansa paused and then crept forward to the forgotten mirror at the side table. "What?" She then peered down and nearly leapt back in surprise at not seeing the reflection she was just shortly looking at, but rather her sister's long face, pale gray eyes, and a head full of thick, untamed dark brown hair. Sansa picked up the mirror and stared. "Is this... am I dead?" Arya in the mirror huffed again and rolled her eyes. "Gods above, Sansa, you're not dead. Yet. Anyway, keep pissing me off and I might kill you myself." Arya shocked colored Sansa's tone, but it was like being back in Winterfell, complaining to her mother about Arya's latest stunt and knowing that she was not behaving ladylike at all. "Good to see you're still you," her youngest sister grinned, showing off all her teeth. "Where are you?" asked Sansa, sitting down in the chair. Arya frowned, and then there was something strange going on with her reflection. It rotated, and then Sansa was looking at a lot of blue, a blue bed, blue curtains, pillows in cream and beige, and a setting sun framed by large mountains. Then Arya's face was back in the mirror's frame. "I'm at Riverrun. I've been here for a few months now." Sansa let a loud exhale escape her. "You escaped." Arya's frown smoothed. After father's, Sansa nodded. Arya turned her face away, but her jaw was tense. "I was there when it happened. I heard you scream." Horror suffused Sansa. She still had nightmares of her father's death, could still hear the phantom swing of pain, swinging ice, and the sound of it hitting the chopping block, of the coppery scent of thick, warm blood as her father's head was severed, and the cheers of the crowd watching. To know that Arya had been there too, but then she remembered when her father was brought out, shouting something at someone in the crowd suddenly, his eyes constantly darting and then locking on something by the statue after he gave her one last warm look. The two sisters sat in silence, separated by miles and a thin plate of glass. How does this work?" Sansa finally asked, breaking the silence. "Magic," shrugged Arya. Hermione didn't have time to explain it. She and Robb had a lot to do after grandfather's funeral, but she had this made for me, and one for Bran and Rickon, too. Yours was delivered specially. "B. Bran and R. Rickon?" stuttered Sansa.
Arya nodded and smiled.
"Yeah, Rickon's out somewhere by Skagos, at last check." And Hermione said Bran was making his way north of the wall, so he's probably with Jon. When Sansa didn't reply, Arya stared. "Didn't you know?" "No," repeated Sansa. "How? I'm a prisoner here, Arya. I only learned today that Mother is dead, and that Robb is missing." Arya's mouth dropped open. "Robb's not missing." Oh, not really. Kind of. Anyway, he's alive and fine, just misplaced by the army. And mothers. Arya turned away. Lord Bracken came to Riverrun about 2 weeks ago now. He said that Robb's somewhere safe, but we can't see him. And that mother was left behind at the Twins. I don't think she's dead. A troubled look overcame Arya's face. I'd know. I'd feel it if she were dead. Arya, Sansa let her voice trail off. This witch... Hermione, interrupted Arya, the flash of something in her eyes. Yes, Hermione, continued Sansa, tripping over the strange name. Can you trust her? Are you sure she hasn't put a spell on you? She's probably dangerous. Lord Varys was telling me about magic from Asshai. Disgust came over Arya's face, and Sansa stopped speaking, watching her sister warily as the familiar look of disappointment settled on the face that looked so much like their father. Hermione's not from Asshai, snapped Arya. She saved me when I was in Harrenhal. She saved Gendry and made sure that he'd stay with me. And Robb trusts her. She saved his life. Or, that's what Uncle Edmure told me, and she's helped the army at the Battle of the Stone Mill, and she went with everyone to the Twins for the summit. Arya shook her head. God, you really are a Lannister, aren't you? I don't know why I'm even talking to you. No! Sansa clutched at the mirror and brought it closer to her face. No, don't go, please. Arya, please. I don't know anything. They don't tell me anything. They summon me and tell me that Bran and Rickon are dead, or that Mother is dead. Joffrey used to have me stripped in front of the court and beaten by his Kingsguard. Please. A sob tore from her throat, and she squeezed her eyes shut. She couldn't lose Arya, not when she just learned that her siblings were all still alive. You married the imp, said Arya finally, her voice carefully even. I had no choice, whispered Sansa, hiccuping halfway through. The mirror is meant for communication. Once you used it, Hermione was going to come and get you to bring you back to Riverrun, admitted Arya slowly, watching her sister. Sansa's breath hitched. The look Arya was giving her was far more than she expected her 13-year-old sister to level her with. There was something cautious in it. Come get me. Arya slowly nodded. Hermione just needs to see a place, and then she can apparate there. Although she didn't know what apparate meant, Sansa caught the meaning she could return to her family. Her fingers around the mirror turned white as she clenched it tighter. How? She demanded. How? What do I need to do? Arya frowned, turning away from the mirror. Clearly, someone else was in the room. There was a momentary jostle to her sister's frame, and then a strange face was looking out at her. There was a familiar enough feature of an oblong face and auburn hair, but the face was masculine and slightly tired. Niece? Uncle? Replied Sansa, with a hint of confusion. That's Edmure, she heard Arya call, helpfully from some distance. Edmure, the new Lord Paramount, nodded. Sansa, I'll get a hold of Lady Hermione shortly, and she can come to get you tonight. She's just finishing up some plans to attack the Twins. Sansa gasped, but she'll come get you as soon as she knows, finished Edmure patiently. I know she will. Why is she going after Lord Frey? Asked Sansa quietly. Edmure's face hardened. For breaking guest rights. For attacking the Northern and Riverlands host that traveled with the king. Revenge, I suppose. Good for her, the thought popped into Sansa's head before she had time to censor it or realize what she thought. Varys might have had a bad experience with magic, and attempted to taint or worry her about the witch in her brother's camp. But everything she had heard so far was that of a woman helping and using her magic for good. Perhaps I can be of some help, that same voice offered again, and Sansa found herself speaking the thought, watching her uncle frown. How so? Sansa took a deep breath. Well, Joffrey is getting married to Marguerite Tyrell soon, and I often am brought to the council, where they often parade their successes or plans in front of me, to demoralize me, I suppose. Edmure's frown shifted into shock. Sansa? Are you offering to spy? He shook his head. No, you are my niece, my kin. Cat would have my head. Robb would have my head. You are a princess of the North. Sansa dug her figurative heels in. Not for too long, but you have me here, and you should use me. No one suspects me, the daughter of a traitor and the wife of Tyrion Lannister. I can be useful. Please, she thought desperately. Let me redeem myself for what I did, for how I used to be. Let me do something for my family, for Robb, for the North. When Edmure opened his mouth again, Sansa cut him off. Let me be clear, Uncle, she said firmly, sitting straight in her chair, fire returning to her and her blue eyes staring at him. I'm not asking, I'm telling. A few more weeks, 2 moons at the most. Until the wedding, I can be useful here. And if there is anything I can do to help my family, I will do it. Peace settled on Sansa, and for the first time in a very, very long time, she felt safe. It was odd looking out at midsummer, beyond the open window of Hogwarts Infirmary, when he last knew the biting chill of autumn. Old Man used to call him and his siblings summer children, those who knew only the positives of harvests and sunlight. The brief winter he had experienced as a young boy was no sample of the one that was shaping up in Westeros when he disappeared. How will my men handle it? Do they have enough food? Shelter? What became of them after the twins? He wondered. Hands clasped behind his back as he stared unseeingly out across the Hogwarts grounds. Each thought more distressing than the last, and he was so lost in his thoughts that he failed to hear the footsteps echo across the stone floor, coming to a stop just a few feet behind him. Stark? Startled, Robb turned on his heel, hand reaching for his sword at his side, but his hands grasped air and he overbalanced, barely catching himself in the spin to face a vaguely bemused Harry Potter. Kindly, the black-haired man ignored the response and asked, "How are you feeling? Has Madame Pomfrey given you the okay to leave?" Robb frowned at the strange word, okay, but he had heard it enough in Lady Hermione's company to know what it meant and what Potter meant by the question. He nodded once, taking a step forward, the strangeness of what had the female Meister called it. Oh yes, rubber of the soul, giving Robb a bit more bounce to his steps than normal. His old clothes, his tunic, trousers, jerkin, as well as his small clothes, had all been removed from his body upon entering the Hogwarts Infirmary, and yet to be returned, although he had been reassured that the elves would mend everything just fine, including getting that ghastly bloodstain out. He didn't know what was meant by elves, so he merely nodded. Instead, he was dressed in odd fashion, very similar to what Lady Hermione and now Potter wore. Loose-fit trousers in a strange, rough blue fabric, and a shorter tunic that he was used to, with buttons running up the front to close the fabric. Potter wore a knitted shirt over top his tunic, with the sleeves pushed up to reveal his wand holster strapped to his right forearm. It also revealed a series of silver and light brown scars of various shapes and lengths that ran up and down his arms. Robb eyed those, and wondered if he received them the same time. Lady Hermione gained her mudblood scar. Potter gestured to his bed. Not gonna wear the robe? Robb eyed the large flowing fabric with distaste. It reminded him too much of an ill-fitting cloak. No, thank you. Potter grinned. Don't blame you. It took me years to feel comfortable in wizard's robes. Come on, men. We're going to the headmistress's office. Professor McGonagall wants to talk to you, but we'll take the long way round. Give you some time to sightsee Hogwarts. Ah, began Robb, blinking. Well, thank you. Yeah, no problem, replied Harry, turning on his heel, presenting his back. Robb tried not to bristle. This way, then. Unfamiliar with following someone, Robb matched his pace with Potter until they drew side by side. The other man, Hermione's friend, didn't seem to notice or care, leading Robb out the infirmary and down various carpeted hallways. Each was equally as large and wide as the last, with tall vaulted ceilings and dark wooden beams crisscrossing above them. Portraits and landscapes paintings lined the walls over top of tapestries, each as different as the one that came before it, providing a colorful and warm backdrop to those within the silver, pewter, and gold frames. In Winterfell, as well as River Run, there were few precious portraits. Most lords preferred tapestries or statues, as finding a master painter was hard enough, and many preferred the free cities over Westeros. To see so many in one place was staggering, and Robb soon found himself far behind Potter, lingering over one landscape or another, each reminding him of the portrait he showed Hermione of the tower in the Wolf's Wood, the only one he had. I say, remarked one jovial male portrait in a pointed purple cap, causing Robb to stumble backward in surprise with a yelp. It's Harry Potter! Across, a beautiful woman with golden skin and black hair, held back by a circlet, called out in an accented voice, "What brings you to Hogwarts, Harry Potter?" Even as other portraits began to move, the people within the frames speaking up and over one another, Robb stared in fascination and horror as Potter strolled over to the portrait of the exotic woman and greeted her like a friend, jerking a thumb back over his shoulder at Robb, who shuffled towards his guide. Hey, Cersei, I'm just showing Robb Stark Hogwarts. He's not from around here. The woman in the portrait eyed him up and down, and there was something, a knowing glint in her eyes when she spoke next. No, he is from quite far away, is he not? Robb swallowed thickly and mumbled, "My lady." "Anyway, we're gonna go through, okay?" said Potter just as cheerfully. Piggy Wiggly Robb shot Potter a sharp glance at the strange words. Is he casting magic? But Cersei just nodded, her portrait swinging open on invisible hinges to reveal a dark passage beyond and stone stairs leading up. A secret passageway? Gasped Robb, hidden behind a portrait. Oh, there are lows, replied Potter with a grin. Coming? He then shouted, See you later, Cersei. Until the next Harry Potter, the woman in the portrait shouted back. And you, Robb Stark, I look forward to our next meeting. Robb shivered and followed Potter as the man stepped into the portrait. He conjured a glowing ball of light with his wand and then threw it up in the air where it hovered and then floated serenely ahead of them, lighting the way. They exited on a completely different floor in a different part of the castle where large windows overlooked the lake. Robb turned, unable to orient himself. Potter saw him and shrugged. Magical castle. One day the headmistress's office is on the second floor. Today it's the fourth. When Professor Dumbledore was alive, it was usually the seventh. How what? Robb struggled to find his words. Magic does that. Hogwarts does, clarified Potter. There's no law or reason with magic. You just can't explain it away or figure it out. You just go with the flow. I don't think I will go with the flow, Potter, thought Robb darkly, distastefully eyeing the back of the man as they walked towards the ugliest stone gargoyle he had ever seen, including those rumored at Dragonstone, only for Potter to stop and speak to it. Moazed. Does everyone speak to portraits and statues in this realm? Robb asked sarcastically. The gargoyle and Potter both turned to look at him, and then the gargoyle leapt out of the way, revealing circular stone stairs. Potter stepped on the lowest, and then Robb bit back another cry of shock as the stairs began to rotate up, taking Potter higher and higher. Come on, Stark, the man called, something humorous in his voice. His mouth twisted down into a scowl, but Robb tentatively stepped on to the lower step, and then immediately struggled to reach out at the walls, even if he was moving up to retain his balance. It took a moment or so, but then he spread his legs and planted his feet and crossed his arms. At the top, the large wooden door was already open, and Potter stood just inside it, waiting for him as the stair Robb was unleveled to the floor and stopped its rotations. Glancing around the large office with several arches to a single supporting dome in the middle, Robb allowed awe to overtake his features. There were soft couches covered with square print blankets, floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with books, and along the walls many portraits. Some were awake and staring at him, and others dozing or snoring. Underneath the giant dome was a large desk, filled with various scrolls and parchments, and single quill with a fluffy feather at the end, twitching as it wrote, an invisible hand guiding its words on the parchment. Behind the desk, an elderly woman rose. She wore resplendent green velvet robes, styled into a dress, with a wide black belt and matching black hat tilted just so on her graying hair. She had gold spectacles, the things on her face that Potter also had, which he said was for seeing, that framed her face, and the many wrinkles and lines that pronounced just how many things she had seen in her life. Welcome to Hogwarts, she greeted with an almost northern accent that had Robb immediately relax in her presence. I am glad to see you out of the infirmary, Mr. Stark. I am Minerva McGonagall, headmistress of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. In front of her desk were two chairs, and Potter artlessly flopped into the one on the left, leaving the right for Robb. As he did so, McGonagall used her wand to direct a large tin towards the young man, whose face lit up. He reached in and withdrew a biscuit that he eagerly began snacking on. He sat stiffly, his back straight. My thanks for you and your maester, Headmistress McGonagall. From what she said, the wound was severe. Madame Pomfrey is one of the best healers in Britain, agreed McGonagall. But a wound like yours is easy enough to heal if caught early enough. We've had experience dealing with Muggle weapons, particularly medieval weapons like swords, although we have not had to deal with those wounds for some time. Do people not use swords here? Lady Hermione never really expanded on that, asked Robb curiously. McGonagall and Potter shared a look that Robb did not like. What? McGonagall cleared her throat. Mr. Stark. Robb couldn't stop the words as they exited his mouth. Lord Stark, if we want to be informal, headmistress, or if you wish to use my proper title, it's King Robb, the first of my name, King in the North. Potter was eyeing him from behind spectacles with wide green eyes, a biscuit halfway to his mouth. McGonagall was frowning but nodded slowly. My apologies, she said slowly, carefully as she looked him over. Robb did his best not to bristle. Lord Stark, what do you know of Hogwarts? Thrown by the change in subject, Robb looked back and forth between the two. Only what Lady Hermione told me, that there was a battle recently, that she was something called a Muggle-born and discriminated against here, that she didn't know of magic before 11, and a few spells that I've seen her use in front of me and my men. What about Miss Granger's parents? Asked McGonagall, something in her tone strange. Or about her time growing up before attending Hogwarts? Robb shook his head. Nothing. Potter groaned, lowering the biscuit completely. Oh, answered McGonagall, frowning. Oh, dear. What is it? Asked Robb, confusion making his voice rise. Our world, well, stumbled Potter, glancing not only at the headmistress for help, but also the sleeping portrait of an old man with a long white beard and half-moon spectacles. It's just that, well, what Mr. Potter is trying to say, poorly, finished McGonagall waspishly with a glare at the now sheepish young man, is that Muggles no longer fight with swords or weapons like yours, Lord Stark. They haven't for at least a century. Most Muggles fought with spears or bows. And now, added Potter, recovering from the look, they fight with guns and tanks and missiles. Robb looked back and forth between the grim visages of Potter and McGonagall. What would I do without my sword? He wondered. It was as much as part of him as Grey Wind. He had been raised on the weapon and was expected to fight with one as well. A more frightening thought came to Robb then. Who am I without my sword? With my title as Lord or King in the North. When I am here, they call me Mr. Stark. But this world... Robb took a deep breath. Headmistress McGonagall, or Potter, he began formally, as he had been trained to do. He let his hands fall open, palms up, as he entreated at them. I find myself very lost in an unfamiliar land and in need of assistance. Will you help me? McGonagall's eyes softened, and while Potter still looked dubious, no doubt wanting to know more about Lady Hermione, a glance at the head of Hogwarts had him nod once and sigh. Well, he began, a small smiling appearing on his face, you're going to need somewhere to stay, and I happen to have a home with far too many spare and empty bedrooms, as well as a rather well-stocked library, added McGonagall, a knowing glint in her eyes. As I seem to recall, Miss Granger overhauled it after the war. She turned to Robb, and Hogwarts Library will be at your disposal to aid you in figuring out a way home. Overwhelmed, Robb bowed his head. My thanks, Headmistress Potter. Are you a good student? Asked Potter, studying Robb with narrowed eyes. Because unless he absorbs books the way Hermione does, he can't do this by himself. An astute point, Mr. Potter. McGonagall was soon eyeing him as well, making Robb squirm a bit under the double gaze. I believe, regarding the situation of Miss Granger being in another universe and having Lord Stark here, we should call in the reinforcements. Reinforcements, echoed Robb. McGonagall drew her wand, and a silvery wisp emerged from its tip, coalescing into a small tabby cat that sat on its haunches and stared at the headmistress. To Kingsley Shacklebolt, the Weasleys, Andromeda Tonks, Arabella Figg, and Aberforth, Dumbledore. A development in Miss Granger's case has emerged, and I ask that all who can to attend a meeting of the Order at the old headquarters at 8 o'clock prompt. The cat nodded once and soared out the window, right through the glass. In the meantime, Potter was digging through his various pockets, sliding a bit down in his chair as his hand went into the tight pocket of his jeans. He fished out a golden coin. McGonagall's smile widened, and there was something of approval in her eyes. You kept it? I know Luna and Neville still have theirs, said Potter, answering something without really answering the question. And now we can see how many others will come. He too pulled out his wand and tapped the surface of the coin, right in the middle of a strange creature's face. At the bottom, letters swirled and rearranged themselves, and Robb read, Info on HG. Need help. By house, 8 p.m. What was that? Asked Robb, finally finding his voice. A Patronus? Answered McGonagall, her tone similar to Maester Luwin when he was imparting new knowledge, a physical manifestation of a happy memory to ward off dark creatures, and as you can see, send messages. We often used them during the war to send secure information as other forms of communication could fall into enemy hands. And the coin was something Hermione cooked up back in 5th year, added Potter with a grin, to send messages and let members of the DA know when a meeting was taking place. Robb nodded slowly. Yes, a protean charm. I think that is what she called it. We used it on our parchments to send instantaneous messages amongst my men. An approving look was on McGonagall's face just as Potter laughed. That sounds like Hermione. All right. A curious look appeared on the young man's face. Just what has she been getting up to? Robb took the time to think back of the various instances of magic he had seen Lady Hermione exhibit, as well as her skill in apparition right to his bedside when he was delirious with fever at the crag, or her angry face and her turned back in front of his men in his war council, or the soft smile and laugh she gave him in the middle of their dance, right before everything went sour. The answering grin Robb gave Potter was nothing short of devious. Oh, you have no idea. I look forward to hearing about it, though, he replied, a more genuine smile on his face. Clearly, Hermione trusts you, and I'd like to think she's a good judge of character. Most of the time, anyway. So, he held out his hand, and Robb stared at it. Potter chuckled. We shake hands when we meet someone. No weapon in our dominant hand. A small, genuine smile appeared on Robb's face, and he glanced from the hand to Potter's eyes. We clasped forearms upon greeting with ally. And with friends, he didn't seem to mind his hand hanging between them. Robb didn't reply, instead reaching out with his own right hand and shaking Potter's. Well met, Potter. Nice to meet you, he replied, withdrawing his hand. And, by the way, for friends, it's Harry. Harry, repeated Robb. And like that, he had an ally in the strange world he found himself in, and hopefully a friend to get him home, back to his army, back to his war, and importantly, back to Hermione. Hermione felt the unfamiliar sensation of things spiraling out of her control. Her stomach took a sharp swoop downward, toward the dirt beneath her boots, and she turned to stare in silent horror back at the closed and sealed doors to the twins, where she just left Rosalind Frey and several of her kin in an enchanted sleep. Sure, she could wake them up again. With a, so sorry, it hasn't been 4 years or anything, but just out of curiosity, do you know what happened to Catelyn Stark? But that option was ludicrous, and on top of it, it would be a waste of her potions. The other option of asking those Freys who had been an actual part of and helped plan the attack during the summit was long past, as those men with her had killed all of them on her orders. She stifled the moan of despair that rose in her throat by clamping her mouth shut tight, her lips thinning. How did it get to this? She thought, mentally chastising herself. Stupid, stupid Hermione. You may be a Gryffindor, but you've never been as stupid as Harry to rush into danger or plan without thinking things out first. When did this change? Actually, she paused, tilting her head to the side. When did it change? Hermione was always known to be logical, in control of her plans, methodological, and cool. She was the girl who came up with backup plans for the backup, not the one to go charging wand blazing. My lady? She shook her head. Something to think about later, she frowned, and wonder about my emotions. I should have a book on occlumency somewhere I can use. Lady Hermione? Hermione turned and looked at the man who called her name. It was the same one who told her that Catelyn and Dacey were not with them in the dungeons. He was tall and tanned despite his stay in the dungeons, with ears that stuck out just the tiniest amount. Hermione could tell because, unlike many of the other northern men, he wore his hair short. This accentuated his forehead and framed his long, narrow face that tapered off to a vaguely pointed masculine chin. Sorry, she focused her attention on him and his tattered purple and white clothes. He eyed her for a moment and then said, Donal Locke, my lady, what is our next move? Hermione cleared her throat. Umber? The gruff man stepped forward and let his booming voice carry as he spoke. We'll take a portkey to our base, and from there you will be looked at by a maester. Those deemed in serious need of rest will be sent to River Run, while the others will remain at the base as we go over plans to retake Winterfell. Let's get out of this courtyard and into the open space outside of the gate, suggested Hermione, where I can create a portkey for us. Some of the prisoners released needed some help, so a few of the men Hermione had brought with her became crutches on either side, but others, like Patrek, Lucas, and Darren, shrugged off their injuries, if they had any, as they weren't telling her to fall into place with Eddard. They formed an odd triangle behind Hermione, which had her glancing back at them in confusion several times. Umber and Bolton led the way, and as they passed under the inner gate, Hermione wrinkled her nose at a stench, casting a nonverbal and wandless bubblehead charm as she did so. Oh, what's that smell? Blackwood, who was just a few paces ahead of Hermione, turned and pointed up. Rotting heads from when the Mountain and his men attacked. Frey had them placed there before the summit meeting. Hermione's eyes went wide, and as they passed through the gate to the other side, she jogged ahead a bit to turn and stare up at the sight. The Mountain's head was obvious, as she vividly remembered fighting him. His hair was long, waving a bit in the early morning breeze, but his eyes were pecked out from the birds, and his tongue was swollen, poking out from his lips. The flesh was graying and bloated. She gagged, spinning around quickly and bringing her hands up to her mouth to avoid puking everywhere. "My lady," a few of the men were asking, prominently Eddard hovering at her side while chasing off anyone else who got too close. She waved them all off. "Fine," she muttered, breathing in the fresh air, her bubble head provided, despite her memory providing her with the lingering stench. "I just wasn't expecting it." "Well, at least Frey did something right," she heard Umber mutter. "How so?" she asked, taking a deep breath. Umber turned to her and pointed back up at the rotting head. "The Martells of Dorne will be damn pleased to know that the man responsible for raping and killing their sister is dead," he barked out a laugh. "But the Viper ain't gonna be too happy at having lost the chance to kill the bastard himself." "Dorne?" asked Hermione, casting her mind back and trying to remember if Robb had ever said anything about them. "Who are they?" "Prince Doran Martell of Dorne is their liege lord," explained Blackwood, watching Hermione carefully for signs that she was going to be sick. "His brother, Oberyn, is known as the Red Viper. Their younger sister married Rhaegar Targaryen, and was killed during the Lannister sack of the city at the end of the war." "Oh," said Hermione. "Oh, indeed," she thought. "I really need to start learning about the houses here and how they're all connected to whatever happened during that war. Whatever it is, these people hold grudges that make the Weasleys and Malfoys look like a minor dispute." Thoughtfully, Hermione turned back to the head. "I wonder..." Then she pointed her wand and cast 4 charms in succession. A severing charm that cut the base of the spike holding the Mountain's head, causing it to topple. A summoning charm to bring it towards her, and then a very quick levitating charm to hold it in place. She finished with a preservation charm. "I never took you as one for spoils of war," commented Bolton, idly watching as she manipulated the head to hold it in place. "I'm not," replied Hermione, glancing up. "But the Martells might be." She looked around the man watching her. "I need something that someone can spare." "Like a handkerchief," suggested Patrick with a cheeky grin, waving a square cloth he had tucked away. "I really hope that wasn't some lady's favor," commented Hermione, eyeing it as she plucked it from his hand, "because she's going to be really mad." There were some chuckles around them, but Hermione ignored it as she kept her levitating charm working at the same time as transfiguring the cloth into a square container, large enough to hold the Mountain's decapitated head. Once completed, she dropped the head and sealed it shut. The design on the outside of the box was simple. It was plain, boring wood, but along the top edge were intricate running wolves, and the lid had the direwolf Stark sigil. The bottom edge had the sigils of the Riverlands and northern houses that supported Robb's army, minus those who betrayed them. Done, she looked up and said, "So let's get back." A dizzying, porky trip later, Lord Serwyn, who was awaiting their return, greeted them. He gave a bit of a bow to Hermione and turned to address her first. "No problems reported by our patrol, my lady. Were you successful?" "Moderately," she replied with a sigh. She turned to the large group that portkeyed in with them. "Anyone injured, get to the tower. You'll be looked over by any masters who will either clear you to remain here or to be sent to Riverrun. Those of you who were with me last night on the assault team, get some rest." "What about that, Lady Hermione?" asked Karstark, pointing at the box she had tucked on her hip. "I have a plan," she replied. "It won't take long if you'd like to come along." She glanced at Patrick Mallister. "You'd best come too, Patrick." He nodded, and along with Bolton and Karstark, they followed Hermione and Serwyn to her tent. Hermione placed the box on the table and turned to Serwyn. "Can you bring Oliver Frey here, please?" He nodded and left, leaving Karstark to frown at her. "The Frey? What for?" "Rosamund said her brother didn't know anything about the attack," answered Hermione, busying herself as she walked around the tent's living space, particularly the comfortable armchair she had near the fire. "She said that under Veritaserum, and I believe her, Oliver served Robb faithfully." Bolton scowled. "You are still going to test him, though." "Yes," she nodded. "But then if it turns out Rosalind was right, Olivar is going to have a task to complete, and then we'll be done of the Freys." She looked at the men in the tent. "You best get comfortable." Bolton and Karstark opted to sit in their seats at the table. near the head, while Patrick chose to stand by Hermione's side when Serwyn returned with a visibly pale and shaking Oliver Frey. His eyes darted from one person to the next, and his steps were hesitant and unsure as he moved further into the strange tent. "My lady," he stuttered, his eyes finding Hermione. Immediately, he dropped to his knees. The sudden move had Bolton and Karstark both reaching for their swords at their sides, and Patrick moved to stand in front of Hermione as a human shield. Oliver kept his eyes on the floor as he spoke. "Pete, please! You must believe... lady, I didn't know about the attack. At all. I would never betray his grace." Hermione gently pushed Patrick out of the way. The young man grumbled as he moved, crossing his arms. "Your sister Rosalind said that you were loyal." Oliver's head snapped up. "Rose, you spoke to Rosalind?" Hermione nodded. "She's well, was asking after you." She was. Oliver closed his eyes and swallowed audibly in the quiet tent. You will tell her that I served loyally and that I am ashamed of my family. You'll make my execution quick?" "Execution?" Hermione frowned. "I'm not going to kill you, Oliver. I'm going to ask you a few questions, and then you're going to do a job for me." Oliver's eyes popped open. "What?" Hermione tilted her head at Karstark, who stood with a bottle in his hand. He knelt in front of Oliver, cursing a bit about his old bones, but the young man obediently opened his mouth and swallowed the 3 drops. The questions and answers that followed held true to Rosalind's and Oliver's words that he had no idea about the plan and had been willing to die for Robb. With that confirmed, Hermione gave the young man the antidote to the potion and knelt in front of him as the potion cleared his system and he focused on her. "I'm going to be honest, Oliver," began Hermione in a light tone. "No one here wants a Frey hanging around." The young man blushed furiously, knowing exactly why. "I understand, my lady. For the safety of everyone here, and you, I'm going to give you a task." She tilted her head at the table, and Oliver followed her line of sight, looking at the box. "You see that box? You're going to go deliver it to the Martells in Dorne." "Sunspear," interjected Serwyn, glancing at Hermione in apology. "My lady," mentally shrugging, Hermione continued, "you're going to deliver that box to Prince Doran in Sunspear." "I understand," said Oliver, a firm tone to his voice. "You must know, though, that once you leave the Northern Riverlands, you're going to block from returning," continued Hermione. "What with the wards over the Riverlands and the fact that no one in the North will trust a Frey anymore." Oliver nodded, not speaking. Hermione surveyed him a few moments longer, then nodded and stood. "All right, Turtrick here is going to go with you, dropping you off at his family seat in Seaguard, where you will get on a boat and travel to Dorne. Once the task is complete, you're free to go, Oliver. You just can't come back." There was a brief look of pity in her eyes. "Only forward." Oliver slowly got to his feet. "Will there be anything else, my lady?" "No, Oliver," said Hermione, shaking her head slowly. "But for the record, I am sorry about this." "About what?" Hermione had her wand out and cast Stupefy before the young man could finish his sentence. He crumpled to the floor, unconscious. "Well, now what?" asked Patrick sarcastically, glancing back and forth between the prone body and the witch. "Because I'm not carrying him." Hermione shot him a dirty look. "You're not going to carry him, Alistair. I'm going to erase his memory of this camp, and anything that's happened since we arrived here. A month of lost memories is better than his entire life. I'll leave the order and his agreement to it, so he knows what he's supposed to do. But even if he attempted to find us, he wouldn't know where to look." Mollified, the Royal Guard nodded. "How long will he be unconscious?" asked Serwyn curiously, having not really seen her spells in action before. "Long enough for him to get on a boat and wake up once they're already in transit," replied Hermione, leaning down and closing her eyes in concentration. She hated using Obliviate, given her history with what she did to her parents, but there was no other way to protect not only the army and their plans, but also Oliver per her deal with Rosalind. Mentally, Hermione cast the spell and then felt the sensation of dual thoughts. Even at rest, Oliver's brain was functioning and he was aware that something was off. Hermione traced thoughts of Robb and herself back through the synapses and found the memories she needed. Once she felt secure that she scrubbed them, she withdrew, exhaling deeply. "It's done." She moved to the armchair, collapsing in it. "Got any more handkerchiefs to spare?" Karstark snorted and instead passed over a scrap of parchment without any writing on it, something left over from their planning on the attack. Hermione wandlessly summoned it, caught it in the air, and then infused it with the portkey spell, making the parchment flash white briefly. Activation will be in 3 minutes, Patrak, she said, handing it to him and watching as he gingerly took the parchment, pinching it between his thumb and pointer. There was a look of distaste, but he picked up Olivar's body in a fireman's lift and held the box in his other arm. He surveyed those in the tent. First boat I can put him on? Hermione nodded. The first one heading to Dorne. He sighed. Well, it'll be nice to see Father again. My thanks, Lady Hermio. And then he was gone, mid-sentence. With a sigh, Hermione turned to those who remained in her tent. Well, gentlemen, I don't know about you, but I'm going to take a hot shower and then sleep for a few hours. We will convene tomorrow to discuss the next step in retaking Winterfell. She frowned. And finding Lady Stark and Daisy. The men murmured their goodbyes. As the tent flap was pushed back behind Karstark, the last to exit, Hermione spotted Eddard and Darren standing outside, their backs to her as they guarded the tent. Silly boys, she thought with an eye roll as she stood, stretching and popping her back. Didn't they know that my tent is warded? Anyway, only people I trust can enter. With a yawn, Hermione stumbled down the short hallway to the back of the tent, where the bathroom and bedrooms were. Although her initial plan was to wash the lingering feeling of the trident from her skin, her drooping eyelids forced her to make her way to her small bedroom. Oi, she protested, half-heartedly, seeing that her bed was already occupied. You've got 2 cots in the other room. The giant direwolf looked up and his long tail began wagging, thumping loudly whenever it hit against the side dresser table, his tongue lolling out. With a sigh, Hermione eyed Grey Wind, stripping out of her trousers and top to remain in her bra and panties, and then shoved at the Grey Wolf until he huffed and made room, curling instead up at the end of the cot, his back legs hanging half off. She pulled back the covers, snuggled in, and was lured into a dreamless sleep by the lingering warmth of Robb's direwolf. Knowing that something was his was nearby. Grim Place was exactly how the name described it, as a grim old place. Robb had been in some dour castles, the crag coming to mind immediately, but nothing had prepared him for Hermione's realm or grim old place.
A side-along apparition.
Once outside of Hogwarts' main gates was nauseating but manageable after all the times he had gone somewhere with Hermione, but the arrival on a narrow ledge in front of an imposing wooden door of a house that looked exactly like all the others had Robb frowning. How do you tell your home apart? He asked, looking back and forth between number 11 and 13, seeing the identical fronts. At least with castles, forts, and holdfasts, they all had unique and different designs thanks to the number of towers, or their location, or construction materials. This was probably like tracking down someone Torrens Square. House numbers? Offered Harry, turning and opening the door himself. Also, Grimmauld Place is hidden by magic from the Muggles, so only Magicals can see it. But I'm not magical, protested Robb, eyeing the dark interior. And no one to open the doors? No guards? What a strange world. No, but you're with someone magical, answered Harry, stepping in and pulling Robb with him. And the stoop is the only place someone can appear when visiting if I haven't keyed them into the flute address. The what now? Thought Robb, eyes looking around the inside of Harry's home, critically and sussing out the best strategic places for him to stand or fight off an attack. Without his Kingsguard behind him or those he trusted, he wasn't going to turn his back on anyone in this realm, however helpful they appeared. The hallway was long and dark, with dark wood paneling halfway up the walls from the floor, with dark green for the rest to a wood-paneled ceiling, closing the room off. There were numerous doors along one side, all shut, and a slightly protruding fraying curtains on the inside, hanging at eye level along the wall on the opposite side. Oh, try not to disturb her, said Harry idly, pointing at the curtains. Her, he nodded. My godfather's mother. Her portrait's behind the curtains. We haven't found a way to remove her yet, so if the curtains open, she screams bloody murder and hurls insults at everyone. The only thing we've managed is to encase her with glass, but we have to reinforce the silencing spells and constantly apply strengthening charms because after a while, she breaks through. Robb gasped and wondered if he had actually died instead. They walked past the last door on their left. On their right was a grand, winding wooden staircase that led upstairs, while on the left was a few short steps into a lowered kitchen. It was much brighter than the hallway, with several windows looking out at ground height to a weedy garden. It was very unlike Winterfell or Riverrun's kitchens, which was triple or quadruple in size to accommodate the many feasts the cooks had to prepare, as well as for the barracks and men-at-arms. But there was something nice about the Grimmauld kitchen. The walls were whitewashed plaster, and any cupboards were a natural light wood grain. There was a stove, although smaller than what Robb knew, and had a wash basin and a countertop. The majority of the kitchen was taken over by a large centerpiece with chairs around it. The back of the room opened up into a large dining room, although laughably small compared to the halls he was used to, or even his family's private dining rooms at Winterfell, with a single table and several chairs around it, including a sideboard of some sort. That room was also whitewashed and well lit by the kitchen's natural light, although there was a hanging chandelier over the table. The Order of the Phoenix used to meet here, explained Harry, motioning for Robb to take one of the seats. He did so, his back to the wall, and not the stairs or windows. Harry turned his back on him and opened a large cupboard door. Inside, Robb was shocked to see provisions, cans, and jars of food. Hungry? I'm gonna whip up something. Hey, said Robb, staring. As the other man began pulling this and that from various cupboards, he began speaking to Robb. Just to fill the silence, meetings would take place in the kitchen, but from what I was told by those who survived, it was always cramped when everyone would show up. So once I officially inherited the house and the war was over, I moved in here as a primary residence and began doing some construction. He glanced over at Robb with a grin. You probably noticed the difference between these rooms and the hall, right? Robb nodded. Other than these rooms and a few bedrooms and toilets upstairs, I haven't changed much else, continued Harry brightly, moving to the stove. Other than it taking time and Hermione was helping me with the library and study, I'm also employed full-time, so that reduces me to working on weekends. Weekends? What is a weekend? Frowned Robb. What is it that you do, Harry? I'm an Orpha trainee, he explained, cracking eggs into a pan, making some sort of egg dish with meats and vegetables by moving his wand and directing the pieces to float into the pan. He looked over his shoulder and saw Robb's face, and that means nothing to you, right? I enforce the law, hunt down those who break it, and arrest them. Aw, thought Robb. You are the king's justice, or a knight. Harry's face was a bit startled and his eyes wide behind his glasses, a spatula moving on its own in the pan. I guess we don't have a king, we have a minister for magic, and that's Kingsley. You'll meet him later. But I'm pretty low in the Quidditch team, you know? I'm just a trainee. There's then a full-fledged Aurora, and then the head Aurora, and then the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. I see, said Robb, although not quite. He was sure he was missing some of the finer points between the two cultures, but in the meantime, Harry slid the egg dish onto a plate which floated across the room to him. A fork came next. Tentatively, Robb reached out and grabbed it as it hung suspended in the air, and then motioned with his free hand towards the plate and fork, now both on the tabletop. Is this normal? Harry was at a seat across from Robb, already digging into his food. Using magic this way? The other man swallowed and nodded. Yeah. You can use magic for just about everything, I suppose. It's harder for Hermione and me, though. Oh, Robb took a tentative bite. Well, both Hermione and I grew up in the Muggle world. I'll take you out later so you can see what London's like, but we never knew magic existed before we were told about it at 11. Others, like Ron, at Robb's glance, Harry grinned. So Hermione has mentioned us. Hey, she showed me a picture of the Defense Association, Dumbledore's army. Robb confirmed. The two were interchangeable. That's right. Officially, we were the Defense Association, but to stick it to Umbridge, we called it Dumbledore's Army. Harry leaned back with a pleased sigh. Those good old days when Hermione would jinx our recruitment sheets to permanently disfigure someone who betrayed our trust. Or when she sent a racist bigot out into the Forbidden Forest to piss off the centaurs. There was a fond look on Harry's face that had Robb frowning. She always was a vicious thing when you pissed her off. I think Ron still has the scars from her canaries, too. Hermione? Asked Robb. Harry nodded. He broke out into laughter at Robb's skeptical look. Don't let her fool you. Hermione can be sweet and accommodating when she wants to be, but she has a lot of bad traits, too. She's stubborn, bossy, even arrogant in her belief that she's right, no matter what, and condescending. She prefers logic to emotion, but she can burst into tears when the people she cares about are being stupid. She cares almost too much once she deems you worth her time. But that can also mean she'll slap you if you annoy her enough, too. Thinking back to Hermione's emotional outbursts in his war room, as well as her frantic and then cold attitude at the crag, Robb found that to be a good reflection of the woman. You care for her a lot? Harry nodded, cleaning off his plate and motioning to Robb's empty one, which he pushed away. A wave of the man's wand had them floating back to the sink, where a scrubber and soap began washing the dishes and cutlery clean. I owe her my life. Many times over. I love her. Robb's stomach clenched. Oh, did she ever tell you about our first year, how we met and became friends, and then how we stopped Voldemort? Robb shook his head. Oh, you're in for some stories, grinned Harry, and it looked a bit wicked. She's gonna kill me when she finds out I've told all this. For the next several hours, Harry spent the time telling Robb about his adventures at Hogwarts and the exploits they experienced. At one point, Harry broke out a bottle of Udgeon's fire whiskey, which Robb was quite impressed by, burping out smoke rings to Harry's delight and admiration. The two were finishing a story, laughing uproariously, when others meandered into the kitchen. Kept going Leviosa until Hermione had enough and tried to correct him. But of course he went, "If you're so clever, you do it then," and she does, laughed Harry, making Robb snort into his shot glass, right before he was about to take a sip. And then there's Hermione, all smug and whatever, perfect grip and glancing with this smirk on her mouth. Really, we're telling that story? Robb turned to see a tall redhead step into the kitchen, a scowl on his mouth as he surveyed the two. Behind him came a few others. As the noise level increased from the quiet of Robb and Harry to a gaggle of others, there was a redhead girl, clearly family to the first redhead, who came up and kissed Harry on the cheek, a tall, broad-shouldered man with brown hair who greeted the redhead and Harry with backslaps and "Harry, good to see you, mate," and "Ron, how's it been?" Closely followed by a dreamy-looking blonde who strode right up to him and said, "You have very few rackspurts. That's a good sign." "Hurrah! Thanks," replied Robb, taken aback. "Harry, dear," a matronly redhead with streaks of gray bustled into the kitchen, and immediately, with a flick of her wand pots and pans, went soaring overhead, and the stove turned on, and the faucet ran water. "You're too skinny, dear. Have you had dinner yet?" "No." "I'm gonna do a roast." "No. No, you just sit there. I'll take care of it all." And then there was McGonagall walking in and talking to a black man in a purple robe trimmed with gold. A stately woman with curly hair like Hermione's, only it was jet black, and she had a straining toddler on her hip, whom she immediately passed over to Harry, who took the babe with a wide smile, and many more Robb couldn't stop to discern from his seat. The noise washed over him, and his eyes went wide as the cacophony had him pushing his chair back until he was well away from the table and able to make a dash for escape if needed. Not everyone went to the kitchen. Many others pulled out seats at the dining table, and others clustered into groups where they caught up with others. Even as King in the North, in a crowded hall, during a feast, never had Robb felt as claustrophobic as he did at that moment, watching as magic was used thoughtlessly to make a meal, dishes, cutlery, knives, ingredients flying above all their heads and mixing together or creating a cloud of pink smoke with a loud bang, making those around the devilishly grinning redhead laugh, or around the babe in Potter's lap, who turned his hair blue, making the women around him coo. It can be overwhelming, can't it? Robb grimaced and turned to the man who stood next to him, leaning against the kitchen wall as he watched the crowd, even as more people turned up from the front door, calling out hellos and how do you do's. "Aye," said Robb simply, eyeing the black man as he stuck his hand out. Recognizing it from earlier, he reached out and shook the hand tentatively. "Kingsley Shacklebolt." The man introduced himself. "Robb Stark," he replied, deciding against King in the North. "Harry mentioned you earlier. You're their leader?" Shacklebolt chuckled, a deep, low sound. "Ah, well, in a manner of speaking, I'm the Minister for Magic, so I'm the leader of Magical Britain, but in terms of the Order of the Phoenix, I'd say McGonagall leads us with input from myself and Arthur." He pointed at an older man with thinning red hair and a receding hairline. "And all these people are here for Hermione?" he asked, stumbling a bit at the end, eyes taking in the colorful robes and mixed clothing. The man nodded. "We all love her. Getting her back is a priority." He then eyed the man next to him. "And sending you home too, of course." Robb gave him a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Of course." Then someone was shouting, and people were scrambling for seats in the dining area. Others hovering in the kitchen, near where finger foods were being floated out. One was a tall, burly redhead, and as he reached for a meat snack, the matronly redhead smacked the back of his hand with her wand. "Charlie, no." Robb found himself at the dining table in an uncomfortable seat with his back to the closed dining door, which must have led back to the hallway, he surmised. Next to McGonagall on one side and Harry on his other. "Settle down, the woman's gravelly voice called, and everyone began to settle. She's probably taught everyone in this room, whispered Harry to him with a grin. We've all been at the end of her professor voice. Indeed, Mr. Potter. Harry blushed and some people laughed. Now, while I realize that the war is over and the Order of the Phoenix is not needed, the woman began, carefully looking at everyone. Let us call this an informal meeting regarding the disappearance of Miss Granger and begin to brainstorm ways to get her home in light of new information. New information, called a voice. It was the man who tried to take some food, Charlie. What information is that, Professor? Both she and Harry turned to Robb, who patiently eyed them back. Harry cleared his throat. Well, that is... It turns out Dumbledore... Professor Dumbledore, interrupted an arrogant-looking redhead. Harry sighed. Right, sorry, Percy. Professor Dumbledore may have been right about where Hermione is. At the blank looks around the room, and a grumble from the lanky redhead next to Harry's seat as he crossed his arms. Harry expanded. He thought that because we couldn't find her, and no spell could either, that she was in another world. There was some silence, and then, I beg your pardon, my boy, stuttered a rather large, round man in robes who came with McGonagall. Everyone, this is Robb Stark. Introduced Harry, and Robb rose to his feet to look at everyone like he was surveying his lords in his war room, king in the north. He's from another universe, one where Hermione is right now. He said she's been with him and his army for the past year, the same length of time she's been gone from ours. Almost immediately, people began shouting, talking over one another. Robb was a bit shocked and wide-eyed at the disorganization the group descended into. There were no rules or respect given to their leaders. He would never allow his men to go on like this. A loud bang erupted in the room and silenced everyone. Shacklebolt stood with his wand raised, its tip smoking slightly. Now then, he began, his eyes coolly sweeping the room. Let's be reasonable and intelligent about this. Yes, Longbottom. The brown-haired, broad-shouldered young man who greeted Harry earlier had his hand partially raised, indicating he wanted to speak Robb supposed, and cleared his throat once eyes were on him, shifting uncomfortably. Thank you, Minister. Could you expand on what you mean by another universe? Harry nodded at Robb, who, reluctantly, began to speak. I am from a place called Westeros. Magic does not exist in the way that you seem to have control of it. In fact, much of the magic in our world is gone for many centuries. There is no divide between magical realms and non-magical ones. The dreamy blonde who spoke to him of Raxburts looked thoughtful from her place next to Longbottom. On her other side was another redhead with longish hair and a fang earring and scars across his face. He frowned and leaned back in his seat, just as the gorgeous blonde on his other side whispered something into his ear. So, how'd you get here then? The question came from the belligerent redhead next to Harry, Hermione's other best friend, Ron. He had his arms crossed on the table and was looking around Harry to stare at him with an unreadable expression on his face. I don't know, replied Robb shortly, in clipped tones. We were attacked at Peace Summit, at the Twins. The where? Robb sighed. It's a castle held by the Freys, men sworn to my uncle. However, they betrayed us and attacked my men and I. Hermione and I had planned for emergency port keys in case anything was necessary going forward, and when those port keys were activated, I ended up... He turned to McGonagall, who answered, in the Forbidden Forest. Hagrid found him. She nodded at the back of the large group, where a very large man, Robb was sure he had giant's blood in him, nodded as well, in agreement. Robb continued, I was badly injured and kindly healed at Hogwarts. There was silence around the dining room as those in the Order of the Phoenix and the Defense Association all took in the news of Robb's traveling to a different dimension, with one exception. Chai! Cried out Luna loudly. Her face flushed rose as she pumped her fist in the air and stood in one movement, causing everyone to turn and look at her. Her dreamy expression was one of triumph, of utter conviction, and she looked far more coherent than she had when Robb first met her. Wearily, Harry asked, Luna? The blonde beamed at the table, unconcerned at how some shifted away or the open mouth looks they gave her. Dimensional rifts. Harry! Loony, muttered Ron, falling back into his seat with a heaving sigh and looking up at the ceiling. If you mean Robb's from a different dimension, we knew that already, Luna, gently chided Harry, looking at her with worry. Luna shook her blonde hair out. No, Harry, you're not seeing forests, trees. They are the key. I'm lost, someone in the crowd said. Luna's brilliant look began to shift into dismay as she looked around the room. Except, the redhead with the fang earring was nodding slowly, a thoughtful look on his face. Professor, where did Hermione disappear from? McGonagall blinked behind her glasses. The Forbidden Forest. I had sent her in there to look for the centaurs. They had scattered after the battle, what with Gropp tearing things up during the battle. Robb sat up straight as he realized what Luna was trying to say, and we were supposed to end up in the Wolf's Wood, a forest, he explained for the confused looks. Hermione came out in my dimension in a forest, the Whispering Woods. Luna grinned at him and he grinned back. Trees, she repeated. I don't get it, someone said. But now Longbottom was nodding slowly, something spreading across his face. The Forbidden Forest is old magic. It was there long before Hogwarts was, and trees are sacred. Ron groaned under his breath. Of course Neville would turn this into herbology. Harry shushed him. What do you mean, Neville? But there were disjointed, broken sentences emerging from not only Neville and Luna, but the redhead with the fang. And then others, including Robb, all chiming in as they began to figure it out. We're talking about a nematon. No, not a nematon, but definitely a sacred space. We have that. It's called a God's Wood, with a weirwood heart tree. A world tree? E drizzle? Branched off, there are different worlds and planes of existence, suggesting that this is one of them.
There are faces in the wood.
Watchers? One more like keepers, maybe. Spiritual guides. There was a loud bang, and the excited chatter of those who were talking over one another with their ideas stopped abruptly and turned to the minister, who again had to gain the attention of those in the room. However, his eyes were bright, and his teeth white against his dark skin as he grinned widely at them, and I think we now have a direction to move in. Luna, Neville, Bill, Fleur, Professor Flitwick, why don't you join with Robb and form a research group regarding nematons and God's Woods? Percy, you, Arthur, and I will check with the archives in the ministry and see if there is any documentation about sacred groves and forests and dimensional shifts. Headmistress, perhaps you and Professor Slughorn can do the same at Hogwarts. Harry narrowed his eyes. And what about me, Kingsley? That's my best friend stranded in another universe. As you mean, said Ron, standing to join with Harry as they stared down the minister. Shacklebolt smiled. Well, you do have access to Grimmauld Place, Harry, with a library that has some of the darkest and let's say, unique magic on hand. Perhaps you and several others can make this our base of operations and search the library here. It was like had broken the spell. On those in the room, people began rising from their seats, moving to and fro, breaking into groups, and then smaller ones, as leaders naturally emerged, beginning to discuss and dish out tasks. Robb felt excitement race up and down his spine as he realized that while his world was significantly different to Hermione's, that magic was able to bridge some of those cultural gaps and give them their first and best lead in how to return him home. Well, said Hermione, sitting back on her heels, as she stared into Grey Wind's yellow eyes, I think you're about as healed as you're going to be without Robb around, Grey Wind. The large direwolf chuffed deeply, his tongue lolling out from where he lounged on her cot, having spent his time in her room of the tent recovering from the crossbow bolts and arrows that had incapacitated him during the attack at the twins. As Hermione had ensured that Darren had both her fake wand and Grey Wind, the man had left the Hornwood men at arms in charge of Grey Wind while he took his spot inside as the King's Guard. Luckily, Darren's men had not touched a lick of alcohol during the summit and were able to defend the wolf. Come on up you get, she ordered, standing up. Grey Wind turned his yellow eyes on her and whined a bit. Stop it. You need to get stronger, and having a bit of a walk will do you good. Grey Wind lowered his head and looked up at Hermione. She stared back with her hands on her hips. I am used to stubborn animals, Grey Wind, said Hermione slowly, narrowing her eyes. Let me tell you about Crookshanks. My lady, called a voice from the front of the tent. Hermione scowled at the direwolf, who now rolled onto his side, completely taking up the cot from pillow to base, his tail swishing back and forth. Next time, she hissed, turning and exiting the room. Standing just inside the flap were Karstark, Bolton, Serwyn, and Umber, with Eddard Karstark just on the inside, eyeing them all. My apologies, my lady, her new guard and Torrhen's brother said, eyeing the older men, including his father, with some distrust. But they said they have a meeting with you? That's right, said Hermione brightly, even as her eyes darted from one man to the next. They can come in. Thanks for reminding me, Ed. Speaking of, who's out there with you? Have you slept yet? Eddard looked a bit bewildered, blinking at Hermione and shaking his head back and forth slowly. His blondish hair had come out from where it was tied back, most likely from him running his hand through it overnight, and his square face was pale. It's Lord Darren, my lady. And, no, we haven't broken fast yet. Lord Lucas will be taking over the watch, along with the small John. Hermione hummed and looked at the others, who were making their way to their seats at the table, including Clay Serwyn, who seemed to be fitting in well. Stark shook his head. We haven't eaten yet, either, my lady. In that case, Hermione moved to her kitchen, motioning for Eddard to bring Darren in, and then all but pushed them into the 2 armchairs that framed the fireplace in the living area of the tent. Hermione was even more worried and compassionate towards Darren, who had lost the majority of his left arm in the attack at the twins and had needed 2 maesters' help, along with her potions, to sedate him and heal the wound. Even now, he was unbalanced and unable to handle anything more than a dagger, but was up on his feet and reporting to his duties against the healer's advice. The 2 guards, half stricken by her manhandling and half bemused, did as she bade, and then all the men watched in complete befuddlement as Hermione, by default, who had become a leader amongst them, began to cook and serve them breakfast. She decided on a simple fry-up, using her magic freely with some charms that Molly Weasley taught her and others she picked up watching the Weasley matron in Grimmauld Place years ago. While she directed her wand for some non-battle magic, she opened their morning discussion, floating 2 mugs of strong tea to Darren and Eddard. Milk and sugar followed, trailing after the mugs like ducklings. With the phrase no longer being a problem, we can concentrate on Winterfell, she said, directing plates to fly and land in front of the men. Stark immediately snatched his hands off the table, where they were folded, to put them on his lap just as his plate landed. What do we know of Winterfell so far? Umber gave Bolton some stink eye. It's being held by his son. Bolton's cold look would have frozen Umber, but instead, the man smirked back, and likely those that follow him. How many numbers? Asked Sarwyn, eyes narrowed in thought. 50 or so, replied Bolton tersely, but they are likely vicious creatures, no doubt barely leashed animals. Fitting? Rumbled Umber. Hermione eyed the sneering large man and the cool stare from Bolton and intervened. Enough! Lord Umber! Clearly, Lord Bolton had no idea what his son was going to do. Lord Bolton, ignore Umber being uncouth and insulting, frankly, it's beneath him, and childish. Both men glared at each other a moment longer and then looked away. Umber mumbling an apology. Engaging even 50 men in a full-scale attack could be dangerous, said Serwyn, breaking the short tension that fell over the group. Winterfell is a strong castle, and 50 men could hold the inner towers easily, even if our men broke through the lines. Hermione served the food, the frying pan skittering off the stovetop and launching itself towards the table, where Stark flinched violently as it appeared at his side, slipping sideways as a spatula dished out eggs, sausages, and bacon, while 2 pieces of cut toast framed the plate. He stared at the food and gingerly poked at it with a fork. The Ironborn took it, argued Darren, noisily slurping his tea from the armchair. With grappling hooks in the cover of darkness as they slipped in, argued Umber. That's hardly honorable. Stark made a face, but carefully spooned a bit of food in his mouth. Bolton and Serwyn were watching him, and when he made a pleasant expression, they too joined in on their breakfast. If only we could get inside Winterfell without anyone knowing, sighed Stark around his meal. If no one knew what our plan was, then neither would Ramsay. He wouldn't expect it. We could lessen any casualties that way, agreed Serwyn, leaning back. Winter is coming. Hermione nodded, slipping into her own seat with her plate of food. You want a Trojan horse? A what? Echoed Umber. Hermione began cutting her meats methodologically and focused on that as she spoke. The Trojan War, Helen of Troy was kidnapped or ran away. Stories vary depending to which side you listen to, and her husband went to war with Troy. The war took place over 10 years, and finally, the Greeks constructed a large wooden horse, which was also their sigil, I guess the closest would be, and snuck their men inside it and left it as a gift for Troy as a victory trophy. At night, when Troy was asleep, the Greeks snuck out of the horse, opened the gates for the rest of their army, and destroyed Troy, ending the war. There was an uncomfortable look on the Northmen's faces. That's hardly honorable. Not meeting the enemy in the face during battle, said Umber slowly. Hermione looked up at Umber and said, coolly, all war is deception. Bolton a glint in his eyes, and an empty plate in front of him, asked, "Are those your words, my lady?" "No," said Hermione, shaking her head. "They're Sun Tzu's." Realizing none at the table knew who that was, or really cared, she made no explanations. Instead, Hermione mentally shelved their plan for infiltrating Winterfell via Trojan horse to ask, "Is there anything else we should know or be aware of?" Cerwyn nodded. "Lord Hoster and I were able to finish our census, but Lord Bracken was able to give ravens from Riverrun to Lord Blackwood to pass on. There has been news from the Wall." The northern men at the table all sat up straight. "What of it?" asked Karstark. "There was a great ranging," explained Cerwyn, and Hermione could hear the capitals in his words. Frowns appeared on all the men's faces, and Hermione looked around the room in confusion. "What's a great ranging?" she asked. "It's a massive expedition led by the commander," explained Cerwyn, turning to Hermione and taking in her inquisitive expression. "Maester Aemon writes that the Wall needs more men, as Lord Commander Mormont took nearly a third of all the Black Brothers with him beyond the Wall." "What was the purpose?" asked Umber, a deep frown on his face behind his white beard. "Wildlings are on the move," answered Cerwyn, glancing down at his notes. "Several rangers have gone missing in the past 2 years, including First Ranger Benjen Stark and Bronze Jon Royce's son, Waymar, on his first range beyond." Cerwyn then looked uncomfortable as he cleared his throat and shifted in his seat, explaining the rest of the letter from the Night's Watch. "There is a king beyond the Wall, a former brother." Hisses escaped Karstark and entered from his seat by the fire, which had lulled Darren into a light snore. "That can't be good," thought Hermione. "A king beyond the Wall? I suppose that is something of a novelty, and not good." "Wildlings don't kneel," replied Bolton in his low, whispery voice, "ever. If they are, what made them change and decide to do so?" answered Hermione rhetorically. She sighed. "I see." She then looked at Cerwyn. "There's more?" "I, unfortunately," the curly-haired man sighed. "Brilliant," grumbled Umber. "Maester Aemon," began the man, a grimace on his face, "writes that brothers found the bodies of 2 lost brothers from Benjen Stark's party, and everyone other than Darren, who was asleep, was staring at Cerwyn. "Well," demanded Karstark, "spit it out, man." Cerwyn looked at his paper and sighed that they reanimated as whites. Skeptical looks passed between Bolton, Umber, and Karstark. Hermione, however, frowned. "Reanimated? He used that word specifically?" "Aye, my lady," replied an unhappy Cerwyn. She looked around the table, and the very disbelieving looks that the other men were giving Cerwyn. She looked back and forth for a moment before asking, "I take it reanimated corpses aren't popular here, then?" That made everyone turn to her in surprise. She met their stares, and summoned confronting the faceless Snape's 6th-year defense text, and had the book rustle its pages past until it landed on images of an inferi horde. Like all wizarding pictures, it moved. Karstark physically pushed away from the table when the book and image came into his line of sight, his chair skidding several inches. Bolton's face paled further, although he stared at the image, and Umber swore loudly enough that Darren woke up with a snort. "Gods preserve us," muttered Cerwyn once he saw the images, looking at Hermione with wide eyes. "My lady, you have whites in your land. They're called inferius or inferia." She sighed, looking down at the images. "I never fought them, but my best friend Harry did when he was 16. Fire is the only thing that stops them. And even then, it was difficult," he said. She looked at the men with a wry twist of her lips. "Magic can be wondrous, or monstrous." Silence fell in the tent. "Normally, I wouldn't even entertain the idea that whites exist," began Karstark quietly, his hands shaking as he carefully brought his seat back to the table. "Because the idea that they do, well, it means that the others might be as well." The other men at the table met his wide-eyed stare equally. Hermione traced the edge of the image of the inferi horde, shuffling their way forward towards the person taking the photo, the decomposed bodies lumbering in their gait, and their empty jaws hanging loose and gapping as skeletal fingers reached forward. Monstrous, indeed. "I suggest we send someone to the Wall to confirm this information with Maester Aemon," said Bolton carefully, after a moment's consideration. "Perhaps even bring back, he swallowed, a specimen, if possible." Umber nodded furiously. "Aye, that would be best. Then we'd know." There was an uneasy feeling in the room as they stared at each other, and it felt like the room's temperature had dropped because Hermione immediately had gooseflesh and rubbed her arms to warm her up. Who? Asked Sir Win, thought thin, almost bloodless lips that slightly trembled as he spoke. A Flint, suggested Stark, and perhaps your son, Lord Umber, and a Mormont. The three of your houses are closest to the wall. You have much better relations with the Watch than someone from a much more southern house. Lady Mormont is currently at Greywater, said Hermione, drumming her fingers on the image of the Inferi and ignoring the way that they tried to bite her through the photo. Stark glanced over, saw it, and flinched violently. I can apparate down and bring her, as well as Lords Derry and Forrester back with their men, and then they can set off immediately. A smaller host can travel without suspicion. Perhaps they can go at the same time as our attack on Winterfell, asked Bolton. So there is less attention on them? Hermione nodded, as did the others. Then that's settled. She slammed the book shut, and there was a general sigh of relief. Now, who wants to explain what a white is and the others are to me, and why it scares the dickens out of all of you? That uneasy look was back between the men at the table, with Stark finally finding his voice first, beginning with a tentative, well, you see, Lady Hermione, it all began over 8,000 years ago, when a great and terrible darkness fell across the world. A month later, and 4 chapters ago, Winterfell was a hive of activity as more and more people porkied in from Riverrun. Hermione watched as the clusters of men appeared outside the main gates, which were manned by several Stark bannermen, happy to once more be home. She stood just on the inside of the gates, on the ground level, with Lucas Blackwood following her. The whole thing of Robb's guard was becoming tedious, but she figured that without someone to guard, they were feeling anxious and latched onto her like chicks. So she spared little thought to the men and left them to their guarding, except to tell whoever was following her to get some food or go to sleep if they hit the 12-hour mark. With her stood Megan Mormont, the small John Umber, and Lord Robin Flint, representatives of the houses chosen to be envoys to the wall. Standing vigilantly beside Megays, however, were 2 young women Hermione had vaguely seen around the camp, but never interacted with. The younger of the 2 was lithe but tall, reaching her mother's shoulders, with long curly brown hair that was shades lighter than Daisy's dark brown. Like all Mormont women, she was dressed in men's trousers and a tunic and furs, but her clothes were trimmed and fitted to suit her body type. The girl had an angular face, but unlike her mother and Daisy, her chin ended in a point. Her eyes were wide and brown, but despite the doe-like look the girl had, the 2 short daggers at her side and the bow slung over her back indicated she was a Mormont through and through. The other young woman, closer to Hermione's own age, as Daisy had been in her mid-20s at least, had short-cropped dark brown hair that brushed her chin with end curls pointing point. Her face was far more serious and solemn, with a blunted chin and narrow blue eyes under a heavy brow. She stood shorter than her mother and was on par to height with her sister. But the difference between the other girl's lithe body was apparent in the square, firm way this young woman was holding herself, boldly meeting everyone's eyes and standing with her legs apart in a power pose. Her clothing was like the other Mormont women, with a thick leather belt encircling her trim waist, where 2 short swords, similar to Daisy's gladius, hung. She was a dual wielder. It's best you leave shortly, Hermione was explaining to Lady Mage, the small John, and Lord Flint, and make to your cousins in the northern mounts to resupply before heading to Castle Black. They were nodding. Lady Mormont then turned to the 2 girls at her side and said, As I will be going north, my lady, I would like my eldest here to take my place in your council, and as the head of my men. Hermione glanced curiously at the short-haired woman. She and Daisy hadn't really spoken of family in the short time Daisy actually could stand to be around her. This is Lyra, introduced Meiji, pride in her voice, and Jorella will remain behind as well, continuing to fight alongside the men. Of course, agreed Hermione, her lips quirking into a small smile. It's always nice to have more female representation around. Lyra's own lips twitched upwards briefly. Maggie, Small John, and Robin Flint all left shortly thereafter, back out the gates of Winterfell towards where a small number of horses had been penned together in a very hastily made stable, and then were specks disappearing north. Hermione turned to Lyra and Jarell. Well, Lord Serwyn and Lord Karstark seem to think that they found a room that we can use for a war council, but I'm going to have to make changes to it. Do you want to come? Jarell, despite her open face, shook her head and said in a cool tone, I'm going to see what our men are up to. Mormont women thought Hermione, they either get along with me, like Lady Mormont, or seem to hate my guts, like Daisy in this one. Lyra, on the other hand, nodded. I will. Despite the suspicious glint in her eyes, she was also curious. Will you be using magic? Yes, said Hermione, watching Jurel walk away. She turned to Lyra. If all goes to plan, we'll be able to have our first meeting tonight with all the members of the army. Lyra hummed, but followed Hermione, who met with Lord Karstark just off the Great Hall. He nodded once at Maggie's daughter and turned on his heel, motioning Hermione to come abreast with him. This way, yo, my lady, the man stumbled partially through, and Lyra sent him a narrow-eyed look, but Hermione was oblivious, already thinking about how she wanted the room to look once they stepped inside. The room itself was small. Up 2 circular flights of wide stairs, the winding well with windows filled with stained glass featuring the history of the Starks. At the top, as a circular room, which fit Hermione's plans, and several windows that faced north over the Wolfswood and towards the northern mountains in the wall. There was a large hearth on the southern wall beside the wooden door leading into the room, but off to the side and jutted into the corner, cutting a portion of the room with its triangular shape. In the middle of the room was a small circular table, just as Hermione had asked, and 2 matching wooden chairs in a dark finish and tattered cushion. It must have come from some storage or had been ravaged when the Greyjoy contingent overtook the castle. However, a few extension spells here, used to modify rooms, and though Hermione would never admit to it, her bag, along with construction stabilizers, she learned from Bill and Charlie in the early days of fixing up Hogwarts there. And the room was triple its size and growing. Lyra and Karstark watched in awe as the room pushed back and out, the circle widening exponentially. Karstark, shaking his head, stepped out of the room and down a few steps to crank open one of the glass windows without a colorful history montage on it. Peering out into the cool air, 7 hells. What? Shouted back Hermione, swishing her wand once more. The table then began to grow and grow and grow. The room hasn't changed its size from the outside, cried Karstark, coming back into the room. He was shaking his salt and pepper hair in bemusement. My lady, you and your magic never failed to amaze me. Hey, but what are you doing? Questioned Lyra, her head tilted to the side as she watched the table soon take up a good part of the room. Hermione grinned, pointing her wand at the chair, and then suddenly multiples were popping up. Bits of dust and debris from the room, stone chips, loose rocks, began to form the numerous chairs. Lyra was counting them all and lost track somewhere around 34, as more and more popped up and slid into place around the very round table. The finishing touches to the room was snapping her fingers to ignite the kindle and wood in the hearth. As well as lighting all the candles in the room, the glass windows opened and a cool breeze swept through the room, taking the must and damp mingling with the heat and warmth of the fire to create a pleasant atmosphere. I think we're done, she said quietly, surveying her work. She turned to Karstark and Lyra, both of whom were eyeing her. Let's call the lords here, shall we? It's time for the Great Council. Arya was the first in the room. She had been apparated over by Hermione personally, who explained that Winterfell was hers until Robb returned. Brienne took a portkey with Edmure, who left his castellan in charge of Riverrun for the evening while he attended the War Council. As such, Hermione hung back as she watched Arya move through the bustling crowd of Winterfell, her eyes wide and hand trembling as she ran it along familiar rails or stones, or clench in anger at something that was burnt or misplaced. Eventually, Hermione nudged her towards the antechamber that they repurposed with magic for the war room. With help from Sir Wyn, Karstark, and Blackwood, who returned from the Riverlands, they had stuck several enlarged maps of Westeros on the bare walls between windows, including smaller ones that gave a far more detailed cartographic look of the area. There was even a low bookshelf taken from Hermione's tent, which had several rolls of scrolls and, through her improvisation, hard binders that she would use to maintain a working census of their armies. Arya was agog as she stepped into the room, her mouth open and gray eye wide as her head moved back and forth, taking in the enlarged space. Her wavy dark brown hair was similar to Lyra's, brushing her chin as it grew out from her choppy cut when she was pretending to be a boy. It made her look younger than the 14-year-old actually was. What do you think? Hermione asked, hands clasped in front of her. This is amazing, replied Arya, moving around the table. But why is this round? Where will Robb sit? You mean, where will I sit? Hermione corrected gently. As you're leading the North and Riverlands now, the idea of a round table means that there isn't one person making all the decisions, like you would have at the head of a table. Everyone's voice here is equal. There was a frown on Arya's face. How will that work? Hermione shrugged. I guess we'll find out tonight if it's possible. You are still the defining vote, Arya, so if you really hate something, it'll be vetoed. Vetoed? Arya scrunched her face up. You sound so strange. Hermione's expression was wry. Benefits of coming from another world. It means to be removed in the context of the conversation. So, if you really don't like an idea, then it goes away, the younger girl finished, nodding. Got it. Great, replied Hermione. She then gestured out with a sweep of her hand to the table. So where do you want to sit? Anywhere? Arya confirmed, glancing back. Hermione nodded. Eventually, after walking the entire table from start to finish, which took some time, Arya chose a seat opposite the doors, her back to the wall, but between two windows. She stood beside the chair, looking at Hermione curiously. Sit in it, the witch instructed, and Arya gingerly pulled the chair out and did so. As soon as she sat on the lumpy and misshapen cushion, the magic Hermione had infused and the seat morphed it, the cushion firmed up and became stark gray. The magic traveled up the arms and back of the seat until it reached the top. At the top of the seat, which was easily seen given Arya's height, the empty oval, which faced inward, changed to reflect the Stark sigil. Arya's face lit up at seeing her family sign, and she knelt on the seat as she turned to run her fingers over it. She was still doing so when the others began to trickle in. Brienne came first, sussing out Arya and moving to stand behind her seat as her guard, and then Bolton by himself, with Karstark and Umber, and then Mark Piper and Edmure next. Hermione stood off to the side just behind several of the chairs and against a wall, watching. She had asked those she was close to pick seats spread out around the table so it didn't look like they were lumping together on one side of the table. Karstark with Eddard apparently agreed, moving to sit at least 10 chairs down from Arya on her left. Ed stood behind him as a guard and then, a moment later, locked eyes on Hermione with a tilt, wondering if she needed him nearby. She shook her head and turned back to the others. Everyone gave Arya's seat a wide berth except Edmure, who sat 2 down from her right, leaving a space between them. Umber and Lyra took seats opposite of them at the table, and slowly people began to fill the empty spaces. But there were many empty seats despite the show of people. Low chatter filled the room, some exclaiming loudly as they felt their seats change. Or the sigils appeared at the top of their chairs. At one point, Arya turned to Hermione. Is that everyone? Her eyes were bright as she looked over a large amount of lords in attendance. Hermione, who had been doing a mental head count, nodded slowly. Yes, I believe so. Some can't make it due to their injuries, or we don't know where they are. Arya then looked at Hermione. Then when are you going to sit down? Hermione looked back at her in surprise. Me? The look Arya gave Hermione made the older woman feel about 2 inches tall. In fact, Hermione thought that the young Stark's glare was eerily familiar to that of McGonagall's. I'm disappointed in you look that Hermione immediately scrambled into the seat. Arya pointed out it wasn't until she sat down that she had a momentary panic attack. How are the others going to take this? Hermione surreptitiously looked, but none seemed to be turning red in the face at her seating arrangement. So Hermione sighed and began to relax against the chair, idly noting that hers didn't change to represent a sigil above her head. Why are you looking upset? Hermione turned to Arya and then glanced at their seats. You are sitting to my right. I'm sitting to your left. Do you know what that implies? Arya shook her head. You've pretty much said that you are my right-hand woman, answered Hermione with a small upturn to her lips. Instead of being the leader making the decisions, you've just told everyone based on this seating arrangement you're letting me give you orders. And when Robb returns, if I'm still in this seat to his left, it's in the position of a consort, the right arm is the blade, and the left the shield. Finished Hermione mentally, but she quickly scrubbed that as she turned to see Arya's reaction. The younger girl was frowning. Wasn't that in the will, anyway? Chuckling, Hermione nodded. Yes. And speaking of, how about we begin with that? So everyone knows what the rules of succession are here. Remember, delegate. You don't have to do everything. Just start us off. Arya grinned back, nearly bouncing in her seat, taking that as her cue. Hermione channeled some of her magic into her hand, letting it build up. Then she raised her hand to eye level and snapped her fingers. Just once. The magic amplified the sound and a loud snap echoed in the chamber, bringing everyone's attention towards them. Once eyes were on her, Hermione turned to Arya, who suddenly went pale as she realized how much power she actually had, with men older than her father looking at her with varying degrees of respect and indulgence. She looked around the room, quickly catching the eye of those she trusted for guidance. Brienne and Hermione. Brienne gave Arya an encouraging nod, but Hermione mouthed, thanked them for coming. Arya quickly swallowed and turned back to face the rest of the table, and stuttered through a nervous "Thank you for coming." She cleared her throat, and at her side, Hermione gave a smile. "I know that King Robb, is who you were all expecting to lead you. I know I'm not what you wanted." She closed her eyes and firmed up, squaring her shoulders in her seat. When she opened them, the icy gray was a shard of steel. "But I promise that I am here to listen and learn from you. From every one of you, Northern and Riverlands lords and ladies alike. Together, we will move forward and show the people of Westeros and our enemies that winter is coming." There was a raucous seal of approval as several began clapping or roaring their approval to Arya's words.
Feeling better, she eased back in her seat a bit, an almost smug grin on her face. Hermione could practically hear her thoughts. "I can do this," but did not speak, and watched and waited until the clapping and approval died down, and Arya turned to Hermione to lead the rest of the meeting. "Right, delegating."
"The contents of Robb's will are well known to those of us who served as witness," began Hermione. She nodded at Umber, Karstark, and Bolton. "The only two missing from the witnesses are Lady Mormont and the Blackfish. Black Walder is dead and does not count." There were some angry rumbles at the Frey name, but it quickly disappeared as Hermione summoned the will, a copy of the rolled parchment Meg had given her before leaving, to catch and read out loud. "I, King Robb, first of his name, do formally decree that my youngest sister, Princess Arya of Winterfell and the North, will rule in my stead upon the conditions of my being indisposed and or deceased, while the Princess Arya is under the age of 10 and 6, with formal guidance and consensus approval by the following: Lord Rose Bolton of the Dreadfort, Lord Brynden Tully of Riverrun, Lady Mage Mormont of Bear Island, and Lady Hermione Granger. Furthermore, upon my being indisposed or dead, I appoint Lord Rose Bolton of the Dreadfort, Lord Rickard Karstark of Carhold, Lord Brynden Tully of Riverrun, Lord John Umber of Last Heath, Lady May G. Mormont of Bear Island, and Lady Hermione Granger, to run a small council to make decisions on my behalf until Princess Arya of Winterfell is of the age of 10 and 6. There were some quiet mutterings from around the large table as Hermione rolled the scroll up. She placed it on the table in front of her and looked around the large room. As you may guess, Lords Bolton, Karstark, as well as Lady Mormont and myself, put forth a suggestion to move beyond a small council to include all members of King Robb's court. She took a moment to look many of the men in the eye. "Each and every one of you has an important place in the Northern and Riverlands army, in maintaining this kingdom and winning the war. You all bring something unique and different to the table, and your voice should be heard." With a knowing nod to the young teen at her side, Hermione finished, "Princess Arya will have the final say on most decisions, but this is a collaborative exercise. So let's put it into practice and see what we can achieve. Together." There were more mutters this time, but of approval, even though it was cautious. "Then what will our first decision be on, Lady Hermione?" A bold voice from one side of the room called out. "Well, we did have a rather interesting addition to our army when the rear of the army was attacked by Gregor Clegane," said Hermione slowly. She turned to Arya. "Shall we discuss Sandor Clegane?" An angry flush stole across Arya's face. "He's here?" "Aye," said a man with a pale face and shaggy black hair. The sigil on his overcoat was unfamiliar to Hermione, but she thought he might be a Little or Nori, a Mountain Clan man. "My men and I were at the rear of the camp that day when the mountain attacked. We fought alongside Lady Hermione and the Hound." Arya turned accusing eyes on her. Why would you do that?" "He killed Micah. He's a beast." Hermione frowned. "I don't know who Micah was." "He was my friend," the teen interrupted hotly, "and he wrote him down and sliced him open and delivered him to the king and queen." There were low murmurs at the table, and Hermione's frown deepened as she tried to recall this incident. But there was no queen around Clegane, unless it happened before she was in Westeros. "I'm sorry, Princess Arya." Hermione ensured she was using proper titles at a full meeting, even if the teen's face twisted at the title. "But I don't have any knowledge of this event." So Arya slouched in her seat and recalled the event, back on her journey south along the King's Road. Of course, some skill was required to read between the angry and clipped words, but it boiled down to Sandor Clegane killing an innocent boy on the angry orders of a bitter and twisted queen, who thought her eldest and spoilt son had been attacked by vicious small folk. A throat cleared, Hermione glanced over and saw it was Bolton, But knowing that the man was soft-spoken and likely unable to be heard over the discontent of the others in the room, she flicked her finger at him and sent a nonverbal and wandless sonorous his way. I do think his face broke out in surprise, an odd sight, with his icy eyes widening as his voice, once reedy and thin and soft, practically boomed across the room, even if it were truly at regular speaking level. Everyone, no matter where they sat, turned in surprise to look at him. I do think that Clegane is as much a product of the Lannisters as the situation is. How so? Asked a curious Riverlord. His brother was happy with his Lannister masters. This one decidedly less so, said a disgruntled Edmure. The man's been drinking his way through the stores at the Twins during the battle, and then afterward at River Run when he was sent back. A drunken man likes to tell tales. He made a face, and he does so colorfully. Someone snickered. Hermione shifted in her seat. It did save my life. His brother was about to kill me, and I was without my wand at one point. There was a startled silence, and Hermione, chin ducked, looked around the room. There were varying looks of shock and surprise. Many hadn't known how close they had come to losing the witch during that battle. The fact that I am as human as them might be a bit more than a nasty surprise. One good deed does not erase a lifetime of poor ones, replied a disgruntled Mark Piper eventually. Abner and several other Riverlords of a similar age, clearly all friends, chimed in with loud hear-hears. Nor should a lifetime of poor decisions overshadow someone's good deed, argued Karstark. He tried. He succeeded. If we were to exile or execute everyone who made a mistake, there would be very few people left. But he didn't make just one mistake, argued hotly Arya. He's made several. The room fell silent again as everyone contemplated the conundrum that was Sandor Clegane. Eventually, Hermione sighed. I don't think we'll get anywhere on this topic tonight, but I would like to state that, as far as my magic is concerned, I owe him a life debt. A what? Someone called out. A life debt. He saved my life, and my magic will be compelled to return the favor, explained Hermione, feeling a headache bloom. She reached up and rubbed at her forehead. I won't have any choice but to intervene physically if we try to kill him. I could lose my magic if I do anything that would deliberately hurt him. She thought back to Harry's description of Pettigrew in Malfoy Manor. The thought of her death, by betraying a life debt, made her sick. Or dead. Double shocks today regarding my morality. Oh dear, thought Hermione with a mental wince. Maybe we should move on to good news. Surprisingly, Arya spoke up. If that's the case, Hermione, you are worth more than Clegane. As long as he swears fealty to the North, to me in Robb's place, then he can remain and fight for us. He is a good fighter, muttered Serwyn. If he wishes to leave, we will not stop him, continued Arya with a nod. I say that is more than fair, considering my personal feelings. Shall we vote? Asked Hermione to the room at large. When no one spoke up in opposition, she rapped her right knuckles twice on the wood of the table in front of her. The magic imbued in the table recognized the praymate's signal, and the oval face on the tall back of her chair glowed a pale but obvious forest green. Loudly, to emphasize her actions, Hermione said, I agree with Princess Arya. Eyes alight, Karstark immediately did the same, rapping his knuckles twice on the tabletop, and his white sunburst on black sigil on the back of his chair glowed green as well. Murmurs of amazement flowed through the room, and Hermione watched in happiness as her magic worked. Those agreeing with Arya's decision knocked on the table, and their sigils glowed green until all had made their decision. Only a few disgruntled Riverlords kept silent on the matter when pressed by Arya for their vote, shaking their head. The overall numbers indicated favor toward Clegane, and the first vote of their Northern and Riverlands Council passed. Hermione felt the swell of triumph and caught umber in Karstark's eyes as she swept them around the room. This might actually work. She regretted that thought a week later, watching the shouting match between two lords. Arya sat at her side in her Stark chair, eyes wide and head bouncing back and forth from one end of the room to the other, like a tennis match. The young teen had been shadowing Hermione and the others from Robb's will for different matters since her arrival in Winterfell. Both the Blackfish and Bolton taught Arya politics. Her great-uncle had a shrewd mind for strategy, but cared more for honor, given his own war experiences with the War of the Ninepenny King. Bolton was calculated and able to suss out weaknesses in others, which gave Arya a different perspective on war, while Maegane Mormont, still gone north to the Wall, left Lyra and Jarrell to teach Arya weaponry as per the heritage of the women of Bear Island. Robb had previously assigned Brienne of Tarth to his mother for protection and company, especially after she had been locked up for her treasonous acts and deteriorating psyche. But upon the decision to attend the summit at the Twins, Robb assigned Brienne to his willful younger sister. While at River Run, Edmure indulged his niece and gave her permission to learn to sword fight, which Brienne had begun and continued while at Winterfell. This was, of course, Arya's favorite part of the day. With Hermione, she spent her time regurgitating her lessons late at night after their meals, unknowingly passing them on to the witch, who herself was learning the history and politics of the North and Westeros, its legends and histories, and reading between Arya's enthusiastic lines. On one hand, Hermione felt bad at manipulating Arya to share this knowledge with her, but Hermione thought it best to not say or go and ask someone, like Bolton or Umber or Karstark, to remove her knowledge deficit. It wasn't that she didn't trust them, but rather she was worried about giving those men more power over her, but giving her only certain information and withholding other. The topic for that week was the coming winter, or already arrived. Thought Hermione with a glance out a nearby window at the softly falling goose flakes, large and puffy as they began to coat the various slate shingles and rooftops of Winterfell, and by extension, their food stores from the Riverlands and beyond. There is no safe way to bring up further goods from the Riverlands without taking care of the advancing Ironborn raiders first, shouted an auburn-whiskered man with mutton chops. The man's sigil of purple and gold, with 4 hawks' heads countercharged, signified him as a member of House Tarek. His lands literally butted against the Lannister lands of House Estren, north of the Whispering Woods and along the shores of Iron Man's Bay. They were often in the way for Ironborn raiders. "We control the King's Road now," argued a member of House Root, standing and gesturing to the room at large. "As long as we maintain the path." "It'll take too long," argued Donald Locke. Knowing his seat of Old Stones was closest to the King's Road after Greywater Marsh and the defunct Moat Cailin, traveling and taking carts led by oxen up that rickety dirt road, it would take months, and in the winter, it will be blocked. "We need ships," sighed Wylis Manderly, sitting in for his father, Wyman, who did not leave the White Harbor for the meeting. "We, the Manderlys, have them, of course, but not enough to participate in trade as well as combat. Not to supply the whole of the North and Riverlands." "We can only continue to monitor the West," supplied Jason Milister, apologetically as he surveyed the room from his seat, Petrax standing behind him. "Just like Lord Manderly can do so from the East. But even so, we're outnumbered and outgunned," sighed Hermione, ignoring the strange looks and Umber mouthing outgunned to himself in confusion. In front of her, her communication parchment dutifully recorded the conversation and different people speaking. Initially, the Master of Winterfell, no longer Luwin but a man by the name of Canyon by way of Derry, had attempted to scribe. However, the fast-paced conversation was too much for the flustered man. And when Hermione suggested the parchment instead to ease his fingers and wrists, the man had graciously bowed out. However, he remained in the room during the discussion in an empty chair that remained unchanged, nodding along or making his own notes on his parchment, which showed up on everyone else's as one collaborative piece. "Can we not place another shield ward like what Lady Hermione did for the Riverlands?" asked Lyman Derry, the youngest of the lords at the table, with a tentative voice. Hermione shook her head. "It takes a lot of time. And quite honestly, it's draining to do. And I don't think many of you would be interested in supplying blood again. Asking the first time was difficult enough. Even now, at the mention, many of the men in the room looked sick at the idea of blood magic, given its connotations in the realm. "Well, the East isn't attacked as much," explained Wylis slowly, "but there is the risk of pirates, and quite honestly, our regular trading partners are the Vale, Crownlands, and the Reach, and none of them are going to continue to trade with us." A glum mood settled over the room. Hermione leaned back in her seat and tilted her head up to look at the ceiling. "What we need is a navy to patrol the waters, and then we can start bringing in merchant ships without worry of attack." There was a muffled snort, but it was more self-depreciative than rude. "My Lady Hermione," began a youngish woman with long sandy blonde hair and eyes that resembled sea foam. "The North hasn't had a navy since Brandon the Burner." "Lady Flint," said Hermione slowly, glancing at the blue waves and blue eyes on yellow background of the young squire that stood near the woman to figure out she was Lyessa Flint of Widow's Watch. "I completely understand that the North hasn't had a navy for hundreds of years, but needs must." Liesa looked uncomfortable, glancing at her liege lord Wylus for support. We don't really know much or build much, my lady. Hermione glanced at Mollister, who shrugged. Despite what many would think, Lady Hermione, Seaguard has a small fleet of 6 longships and 2 war galleys. We are on the coast, but mainly for trade, not defense. Lannisport was always the first point of contact for large-scale raids. Hermione frowned, glancing down at her parchment as she thought. No other words were recorded on the paper, but there were some strange scribbles in the margin. Her frown deepened. Maybe I should redo the runes and charms on this later, if it's not even copying down things properly. At her side, Arya leaned forward a bit and muttered, "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that we need to expand and build trade," replied Hermione, looking up, just as the others broke into small conversations with those nearby. She kept her voice low. "We need to find something valuable to trade with others. If the rest of Westeros is close to us, there are some internal options for food growth." "Oh, how so, my lady?" boomed Wylus, who had been listening in. Hermione sighed. Sometimes her magic was too good and carried her voice to those who were interested in hearing. "Greenhouses," began Hermione, listing off ideas with her fingers as she spoke. "Hydroponics, both would produce year-round crops. A navy built up along the west, spanning Seaguard to the Stony Shore, Sea Dragon Point, and Bear Island. Smaller ports of trade at Widow's Walk, and maybe a new settlement on the last river between Bolton and Karstark lands." By now, most were looking at her. Hermione, realizing this, stood and leaned over the table. With a wave of her wand, it turned into a large-scale map of Westeros and the surrounding area, an idea she had taken from Arya, who complained one night about Dragonstone's wooden war table after a lesson with Brendan Tully. With each named place for a potential port, the wood changed color, reshaping through her transfiguration spell to form a port with extended docks into the nearby water. "We would need a significant amount of timber," said Mollister slowly, also standing, and he brought his hand to his chin to rub it. Wylus also stood, looking over the map. "This also gives a significant advantage to the west." He eyed Hermione, and she sighed, realizing that she needed to sweeten the deal for the rich trade port. "What about a naval academy? In my world, people go to specific schools to learn trades and abilities. A naval academy at the White Harbor for training would then also be the headquarters of any naval operations." She looked around the room. "As for the timber, that's easy enough to distribute and transport by shrinking them down and port-keying them to these locations. I would just need to visit them first to visualize them for the spell." The glum mood began to shift. "And what about these greenhouses and hydroponics?" asked someone else, a knot from the Northern Mountain clans. "Are these similar to glass houses?" Arya took over. "I think they are the same thing, right, Hermione?" She nodded. "Yes. But hydroponics is the growth of vegetation in water. It's a bit more scientific than that. It requires a lot of minerals and the right levels of oxygen and nitrogen, but it's something we can work towards later." She glanced at the map and used her wand to trace a bright white line from the Three Sisters in the Bight across to Moat Cailin and then to the Fever River, and out to the Salt Spear and out to Blueswater Bay. "And maybe eventually a canal." A bewildered Clee Serwyn sputtered. "And how long would that take?" Hermione's shoulders slumped. "At nearly 400 miles from one end of this to the other, at least a decade, with my magic. Even if it would be beneficial for us, it's definitely not something feasible right now." There were groans at the pronouncement. "Let's vote on what we can do now," proposed the Great John, slamming a hand down on the table, making the noise echo, the first being to build a navy. Immediately, those at the table scrambled to make their decisions, some rapping on the table to turn their sigils green. A few others took moments longer, but eventually, all occupied chairs were green. Umber nodded in satisfaction. "To begin construction in the west, at the locations of the Stony Shore, Sea Dragon Point, and Bear Island," asked Karstark, his voice loud and clear. Again, several raps knocked on the table, and almost everyone agreed to the proposal. Bolton nodded in satisfaction, adding, "To begin construction in the east, at Widow's Walk, and on the last river." There was a bit more waffling here. "If it's on your land, the two of you will benefit from it the most," argued Blackwood with a humph of unhappiness as he leaned back and crossed his arms. "I'm seeing more benefits for the north than for us Riverlords." Bolton and Karstark's eyes met, and a silent communication occurred, with Karstark nodding once. Bolton turned back to face Blackwood. "Lord Karstark and I would cover all costs of the venture out of our own coffers." Blackwood still looked unhappy, as did many other Riverlords, so Hermione suggested, "What about a wage system?" Head swiveled to face her. "My lady," asked a cautious Bracken, although his tone was more aligned to a thoughtful, "Oh?" to go on than cautionary, "What are you doing now?" "If there will be trade ports at Widow's Walk and a new one on Lost River, why not send Riverlands men there first, from the Naval Academy once training is complete," began Hermione. "Implement a wage system there. Men who work or are stationed at these ports receive an allowance or set wage per month, that they can pocket from there. Their liege lords can ask for Hermione bit her lip, squirming at the idea, but pushed forward, a tax where a portion of that money returns to them. The idea of a tax seemed to be a bit too receptive, and Hermione certainly didn't want the poor to become even poorer, so Hermione rushed to add, "Of course you could also just provide startup capital to Lords Bolton and Karstark as well and ask for a shareholder position in these ports, meaning that a portion of their gross would also go to you." This too seemed to appeal to the Riverlands lords, many of whom were eyeing a now flustered Karstark and cool Bolton, although the tiny cut-eye the softly spoken man sent Hermione conveyed his displeasure. She shrugged unrepentantly. "All in favor of Widow's Walk and Last River?" called Arya, returning their attention to the last proposal. "As long as there is some form of monetary agreement," added Blackwood with a resolute nod. The room voted, and the chairs were green, passing the motion and amendment. Hermione spied the pleased smile behind Blackwood's black beard and sighed. Always the opportunist, she thought, shaking her head a bit. From there, the conversation turned to how much wood would be needed, who could spare men or small folk to begin chopping down trees and the stripping of the wood. When would Hermione find the time to transport and or visit these proposed ports? Where would they find people with winter coming or already here? Finer points were conversed and covered, and slowly as the daylight bled into night, the lords and ladies at the table came to several agreements and provided several options to go forward to supply the North and Riverlands with the materials necessary for these ventures, as well as future ventures. Arya called an end to the session, no doubt eager to attend her evening meal, as the 14-year-old scrambled out of the room quickly, Brienne on her heels. Hermione eased off her seat in response to the end of the session, picking up her parchment. She sighed, looking at the scribbles of illegible words and shapes that took up the bottom, just under the results of their votes. She rolled it up, vowing to look into that later, and pocketed it into her ever-present beaded bag at her side. "My lady," a voice said, and Hermione turned to see Patrick Mallister and Eddard Karstark had left where they stood behind their fathers to approach her. Just hovering behind them were Lucas Blackwood, Donal Locke, Wendell Manderly, and the small John, each focused squarely on her. Hermione narrowed her eyes suspiciously on the large cluster of Robb's guard. Eddard and Patrick were the most well-known to her, having stuck to her side like a burr since the twins, with Lucas and Wendell spending more time with Darren Hornwood, who was in the anger stage of the loss of his arm. "Yes?" Patrick looked nervously around at the other men in the quickly emptying war room as the older lords went to their meals in their private rooms or the hall, but a few, predominantly their fathers, for those who had them there, remained. He then took a deep breath and sank to one knee in front of her. Hermione froze. Eddard immediately copied Patrick, with Lucas shortly after him. Wendell and the small John, both being larger men, sunk quickly to their knee, but shifted to get comfortable. Donal Locke took the lengths, giving her a measuring glance, but then was looking up at her from below. "If Hornwood were here, he would do the same, my lady," began Patrick, clearly the spokesperson of the group. "But as he is not, I hope you take my words as sincere." "Patrick, what are you doing?" asked the flustered and incredibly nervous Hermione. She glanced at his father, who gave her an amused nod. Blackwood's face shone with pride, and Hermione's heart sank to somewhere around her ankles. "Ed, get up! For Merlin's sake." "We need to guard someone, my lady," explained Patrick, peering up at her, his brown hair pushed off his forehead. "We were part of his Grace's guard, and Princess Arya already has Lady Brienne as her sworn shield. I'm sure one or two of you could join her," interrupted Hermione, her voice going shrill at the end in panic. "Torrhen gave his life to protect you, as his grace asked," blithely continued Patrick, speaking over Hermione with a glint in his eyes that reminded Hermione all too much of a combination of stubborn Harry and devilishly amused Sirius. A frown pulled on Ed's face. "We would do the same." 6 pairs of eyes peered up at her from faces near her age, Lucas 2 years older to Donal in his 30s. All were looking at her expectantly but solemnly. "What about your fathers, your houses?" she sputtered out. Pardon, Lady Hermione, said the small John with a grin, but our families are strong warriors, capable without us. Hermione's shock quickly nosedived to indignation. Excuse me? Are you saying that I'm not capable? The small John froze and his eyes widened in panic. You are far more than capable, smoothly interjected Patrick. But you are not invincible, Lady Hermione. For those times when you are not, let us be there. Weakly, Hermione looked at them and said, But, Sansa, when Princess Sansa returns, then we will reassess and assign someone to her, explained Patrick easily. Hermione frowned. I can't stop you, can I? He shook his head. Her frown deepened and she cut her amber eyes across them all, petulantly saying, Fine, you can all guard me, not like it's necessary. At her words, relief spread across Patrick's face, and Hermione realized that they were expecting more of a fight from her regarding the topic. The men got to their feet, most of them towering over her. Annoyed, she added with some spite, Let's start now, shall we? I'm going to see Theon Greyjoy. Donald nodded, but Hermione wasn't about to make it easy for them in Winterfell, and turned on her heel, twisting the air around her sharply so that a very loud, very unhappy crack cut through the war room. She apparated to a different tower on the opposite end of the castle, landing down the hall from the room where Theon had been placed. There were 2 guards at his door, and 2 guards on either end of the hallway. Those closest to where she appeared jumped, falling into a battle stance. Upon seeing her, both scrambled to stand straight, and one hastily said, Our pardon, milady. Hermione waved it off, striding down the stone until she reached the other 2 guards, who nodded respectfully at her and then opened the door. Inside, Hermione saw that the room was outfitted similarly to that of Jaime Lannister's. Everything but the essentials were removed, including sheets. Tyrion himself had an ankle chain cuffing him to the wooden bed. The bed itself wasn't too sturdy, and Hermione could probably have yanked herself free of the cuff without her magic, but Theon was so frail and unstable that the thought likely hadn't occurred to him at all. The young man was curled on the bed, back facing the fire. He was dressed nicely, although not in the finery of a Greyjoy heir. However, it was warm wool, and the temperature was pleasant. Hermione eased further in, her steps soft, but it was like a gun went off, as Theon jerked his head towards her and shuffled backwards until he was pressed against the wall. The bed was pushed up against. In the warm light of the room, Hermione could see everything that Ramsay Snow had done to him. Her eyes roved down, cataloging the missing finger, the shiny white and pink of new skin and scars along his arms from sleeves pushed up. His hair was stringy and missing in clumps from where he must have pulled it out in panic or fear, and his cheek was misshapen, like the bone had been broken at some point and was healing poorly. Knobby knees were visible beneath his loose trousers, and his bare feet were badly scarred with crisscrossing white lines, the toes purple and the nails slowly growing back. No, he mumbled under his breath, and brought his arms up to cross in front of his face. The door behind her opened once more, and Maester Canyon breathlessly entered. Lady Hermione, I must ask you. Theon, she said, interrupting the man. Look at me. The man on the bed kept whimpering, ignoring her. She frowned, turning to Canyon. How bad was the torture? The man, reedy with wide, round eyes that gave him a perpetual shocked look, but nowhere near as comforting as Luna's wide-eyed wonder, sputtered, My lady, really, you shouldn't. How bad, Canyon? He sighed, playing nervously with his Meister's lynx. Not as bad as I heard the Boltons could be. At the name, Theon twitched. Mentally, asked Hermione, looking down at the man who betrayed Robb and ran his brothers out of Winterfell. Who did you kill in their place? Why? Did you do that to save Bran and Rickon? Why would you do that if you hate the Starks? Canyon shrugged. Sometimes he returns. Other times, he is Reek. Theon lowered his arms and looked at them with wide eyes. Reek! I am Reek, please. Hermione pursed her lips. Using legilimency on him would probably trample through much of the confusion regarding his identity, but Hermione neither knew how to perform the spell, nor did she want to end up caught in someone with a dissociative personality. Instead, she lowered herself carefully to the floor at the side of the bed, holding Theon's eyes as she knelt. At a lower point than him, he seemed to unwind slowly. She heard a commotion, and someone, like Eddard, she was getting used to his mouth, swear colorfully. She threw back a hand, stopping her new guards from entering, and kept Theon's attention on her as she smiled gently at him. "Hi, Theon," she said, changing her tone and attitude from when she first entered. His body began to uncurl. "Do you remember who you are?" "Theon?" she asked, supplying him with information. "You're Theon Greyjoy. Remember?" "Theon?" he muttered back, eyes unfocused. "Not Reek?" "No, just Theon Greyjoy." The man shook his head, rocking back and forth and gripping his hair. No. Theon failed. Failed. Hermione grimaced. Was this how working with Dobby at his maddest was like? If so, I owe Harry and Ron a lot of apologies for Sepsible. Hesitantly, she reached forward and gently pried Theon's hands away from his hair, shushing him like a mother would a child. The man calmed down, breathing quickly. "You didn't fail Theon," said Hermione, although she wasn't sure what he failed at. Bran and Rickon, maybe. "You're here," he moaned, shaking his head. No, failed. Failed at capturing Winterfell, failed father, and failed Ajay. Well, she thought that solved one thing. His chest heaved up and down, and Theon struggled to get air in his lungs, but it seemed that he wanted to speak this mind, and the words exploded out of him in gasps and bursts. "I couldn't do it, couldn't kill them, had to, so, something, the Miller's children, they were like a family to me. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, I had to. Honor as a Stark, but such a Greenlander, bad Theon, bad, I didn't wanna, I'm sorry, it all went wrong. I had to, I chose wrong. Hermione blinked and watched as he collapsed into sobs, his face covered by his hands. It was the only noise in the room, and Hermione realized, with a mental sigh, that if she thought Sandor Clegane was going to be difficult, she clearly underestimated Theon Greyjoy and his slew of problems. Pushing off with her hands, Hermione rose from her crouch beside the bed and turned. Eddard was in the doorway with Donalock beside him. Both were frowning heavily at Theon. "What's all that, then?" muttered Ed darkly, as Hermione approached. Hermione glanced over her shoulder at Theon, while Maester Canyon attempted to get him to drink some milk of poppy to send him to sleep. I would say that's a broken man regretting his life's decisions. "Will his sister and father send men for him?" asked Locke, eyes shifting from Theon to Hermione. She paused, and then shrugged. "I don't think so." Unbidden, a lance of sympathy shot through her. "I don't think anyone is going to come for him." Hermione stepped forward and with a gentle hand pushed on Ed's chest to shove him towards the door. She was a bit more hands-on with the Karstark brothers than others, as she often treated Torrhen as such. "Come on, I think it's time we leave. There's nothing else to see here." Standing around the crowded dining table in Grimmauld Place, Robb held his breath as he wrote down, "Hermione, can you read this? I'm at Grimmauld Place with Harry," and watched as the ink dried, soaking into the communication parchment he had with him when he traveled to her world. Across from him, Luna's pale eyes shifted from the parchment to him, and when they met, she gave him a small smile. "It'll work, mate," said Harry quietly at his side, clapping a hand on his shoulder in support. "Bill's a genius with ancient runes, and he was able to deconstruct and figure out what spells Hermione loaded on this thing. And since it's the original one that she gave you," the man in question said, with a toothy grin as he looked up from his relaxed lounge against the edge of the table, "it'll appear on all the parchments." Robb nodded, looking back down. He sharply inhaled, along with several others, giddy as ink began to spread out at the top of the parchment. However, his elation shifted quickly to disappointment as the written lines appearing in short blocks of text were jumbled, a mess of odd shapes and squiggles that didn't appear like anything Robb could read. Is this a different language?" he asked, turning in confusion to Bill. The redhead frowned and leaned over the table. The only person seated at the table was Professor Flitwick, and even the small man had a hard time of it as he squinted his eyes and then shook his head. "That's no language I've ever seen." "Is it the language of your people, King Robb?" Robb shook his head. "I don't recognize this either." Ron snorted, rolling his eyes. "Hermione knows loads of languages. This could be any one of them." Neville looked askance at his fellow Gryffindor alum. "What? You think she's writing in code?" "She'd never do that," replied George confidently, causing a red flush to race up Ron's ears. "If she were, more of a troublemaker, more interested in pranks like me and Fred were, or the Marauders, sure, but..." With a sigh of disappointment, Harry eased back and took a step away from the table. "I guess we can strike that idea off the list." Robb, too, leaned back and rubbed at his face. "Perhaps I was too hopeful for our first venture." "And back to the drawing board," chipped in Flitwick, slightly more cheerful than the group felt. "This was only the first of several ideas. You, Grace, do cheer up. It's not the end of the world. Miss Lovegood, Mr. Billis. Bill, muttered Bill, lowly under his breath, a slightly wolfish growl vibrating from his throat. George Weasley and Miss Delacour will move on to the next, finished the charm professor evenly. This was just one idea of linking an item from your world with ours based on the spells attached to it. It's only been 2 weeks, said Harry quietly at Robb's side. Honestly, I would have been surprised if we found a way that quickly, given that Hermione's been missing for over a year. I don't have a year, replied Robb, just as quietly, the protest in his voice making his throat tighten. He swallowed thickly. Harry nudged Robb, causing the man to look at him directly in his emerald eyes. We'll find a way, I promise. Robb searched his eyes but saw nothing but calm conviction and truth. Finally he sighed, his shoulders slumping a bit. Okay. He drew in a deep breath and turned to face the room. What's next? When Oliver awoke, he was lying face down on hard, uncomfortable wooden planks. A splinter was lodged in his cheek, and he nearly cried, pulling it out as he sat up, blinking in the bright sunlight. Immediately, his stomach rolled in time with the rocking of the ground, and he somehow managed to make it to the railing, leaning over it just as his stomach emptied its contents into the clear blue waters below. A muffled laugh made Oliver turn, looking over his shoulder. A weathered man grinned at him. First time on a boat, lad, the man asked cheerfully. Far too cheerfully for Oliver. He groaned and leaned back over the side, spewing spittle and water. Eventually, he heaved away from the rail, but remained clutching tightly at it. He knew he was shaking, and the heat from the sun bore down on him, plastering his brown hair to his forehead. Where am I, he moaned. Who are you? The weathered man grinned. You're on the Maiden's Vault, lad. Week 2 of 10. We left Seaguard and are traveling to Planky Town in Dorne. You've been the best guest we've had for some time. Completely out of it until now. As for who am I am Captain Tollett. Swallowing the bitter taste of bile, Oliver closed his eyes. Planky Town, he thought, frowning. How in the 7 did I end up here? Pain burst across his brain, and a female voice, clear as a bell, spoke as his memories coalesced and came together. Execution? I'm not going to kill you, Oliver. You're going to do a job for me. Lady Hermione. Weaver's eyes shot open, and he glanced around the vessel. Its large white sail billowed in a strong northerly wind as they cut across the gentle waves. There was no shore. Over a week away from Seaguard in the Riverlands, Oliver could only assume they were reaching the ends of the Westerlands and entering the long coast and waters of the Reach. Oliver looked around. Tollett was looking at him strangely. You see that box? You're going to go deliver it to the Martells in Dorne. Did I arrive with something? Well, Solivar asked. He tried to stand on his legs, but they were shaky and he felt as awkward as a newborn colt attempting to stand for the first time. Tollett nodded slowly. Aye, you did. It's down below by your bunk. With a firm nod and thanks, Oliver swayed and stumbled across the crowded ship, flushing under the knowing looks and muffled snickers of the crew and sailors at his gangly walk, until he was below. He found the crew's quarters a long stretch of a room with hammocks for beds hanging in groups of 3. His box was nearest to the door. You must know, though, that once you leave the North and Riverlands, you're going to block from returning. Oliver shut his eyes at the pain of the lady's voice. It rang with the same tinge of sympathy as she said it then, and Oliver felt it deep. At least Rose is safe. She promised. She promised! I just can't ever see my family again. He stumbled into the rough hemp hammock and curled up there, trying to ease his stomach and nausea that wasn't just from being seasick. It took a long time for him to fall asleep, but sleep he did, and when he woke, Lady Hermione's voice echoed, You just can't come back, only forward. And on the tail of that, a whispered addition, so go forward, Oliver. Be brave. He stumbled from his bed, less shaky than the day before, and marched to Tollett, who stood looking forward out to the horizon with his hands clasped behind his back. The man turned, a question on his lips, but Oliver beat him to it, asking determinedly, What can I do? Several weeks later, Tollett and the Maiden's Vault drew into Planky Town, just as a red sun sank off to the west of the glittering waters of the summer sea. Oliver's face had finally turned brown instead of bright red, the skin having peeled off during the journey. His hands, once calloused from his sword, were calloused now from rope burn, and different muscles formed. How long do you think you will be? Asked Tollett, as he drew alongside the team, both staring out at the busy port town even at dusk. I'm not sure, replied Oliver. Tollett hummed. Well, we'll be restocking before heading off to Volantis. That's at least a 3-month-long journey, and we'll need the provisions for it. It'll take a good 2 weeks or so before we're ready to head off. Captain? The older man smiled down at Olivar and grinned. There's a spot here for you, Olivar, if you're back in time. Olivar's eyes grew wide. Captain, he nodded enthusiastically. I do. I will be. Good, chortled Tollett. When you're on land, go see old Gath, 2 streets over and down past the Viper's watering hole. He'll treat you well if you say you're one of mine, all right? He'll get you a good horse and guide to Sunspear. Barely an hour later, Olivar, clutching the large square box he was given, awkwardly holding onto it as he didn't have a pouch to place it in as he bounced along with his horse's canter. The cool desert air was a relief to the warmth of Dorne, something he, affray from the northernmost point in the Riverlands, as he had never experienced such heat even during their warmest days of summer. His guide, a miserable dark-haired man who was selling turnips of some kind, was often grumbling about foreign idiots. Olivar assumed he meant him, but was kind enough to ensure Olivar didn't stumble into a nearby snake pit on his first full night, nor die of dehydration a week later. Still grumbling that he would wait for Olivar to finish his business, he nudged Olivar in the direction of Sunspear. The old palace was a large compound of domes and towers that was separate from the town of Sunspear by a thick, reddish-brown, clay-like bridge. Its walls were also the same clay-like color, dusty and dry, except for the dome, which glittered sunlight off its glass and gold form. Guards stood positioned along the bridge, carefully eyeing him as he, along with other petitioners, inched forward. Eventually, Olivar passed under the old palace gate and found himself shuffled off to one side into smaller, more manageable groups. His was not near the front of the procession led inside after checked over by guards, but by no means towards the back either. Eventually, a guard in Martell colors of burnt orange strode towards him, and the 4 others in his group eyeing them all carefully. You there, he said, pointing at Olivar. Who are you and what's in the box? I am Olivar Frey, he began, and he saw the guard's mouth twist in displeasure. News of what occurred at the Twins must have already reached Dorne, thought Olivar, but then he frowned. What happened at the Twins? All he knew, it was something bad, because his stomach turned over, as bad as his first days at sea. And, in the box? Olivar blinked, panic overtaking him. I don't know. It was given to me. The guard's eyes narrowed. By whom? By Lady Hermione, he blurted, and then sighed in relief. He could at least speak someone's name. Lady Hermione? The guard repeated, his voice low. Something dawned on him because he pulled Olivar from the group and ushered him inside alone. Blessedly out of the sun and outer courtyard, Olivar breathed the cooler air as his steps slipped along pale white marble floors. The further the guard led Olivar through the palace, the more guards there were until he was sweating with nerves. At a closed set of doors, a tall, dark-skinned, and broad-shouldered man with a glaive stopped the guard escorting Olivar. Stop! Who is this? The man's voice was low and rumbled across the marble tiles. Olivar Frey, explained the guard. He comes from the north, bearing a box from the Lady Hermione. The 2 men shared a significant look, but the glaive-carrying man scowled and asked, Did you look in the box? What if there is a spell or curse attached to it? The guard paled and shook his head. Grumbling, the other man jerked his head at the box, and Olivar dutifully held it out to his escort, who swallowed thickly and then quickly unlatched it, swinging the lid open in a rushed manner. He looked down into the box and froze. Well, asked the impatient man. Captain Hode, it's the other guard sputtered, turning back from the contents of the box to stare in mystified surprise. You will want to see this? Narrowing his eyes, Hota stepped forward and peered into the box. His own eyes grew wide, and he glanced between Olivar and the box several times before slamming his glaive on the marble and turning sharply on his heel, opening the doors. Inside was the throne room. Underneath the dome Olivar had been admiring earlier. It was round, with several thick windows and many colored glass patterns that created elusive colors and shapes on the white marble. There were 2 seats on a dais, near twins to one another. The seat inlaid with the Martell spear on its back was occupied by a man, thin and slightly curled, and dressed in a light orange tunic. His hair was curly and salt and pepper in color, and his beard, more white than black, was neatly trimmed close to his cheeks. His skin was a deep tan, olive almost, and his eyes dark. Arrow? Who is this? He asked, and his voice was strong, eyes curious. Forgive me, my prince, Arohota said, stepping forward and bowing. This is Oliver Frey. He comes with a gift from the Lady Hermione. The man's eyes narrowed. Lady Hermione, the witch in the north. The dark eyes cut to Oliver, and a hand beckoned him forward. Oliver swallowed and did so, in careful, slow steps. As he neared, he realized that there was another man hidden behind the occupied chair, his tunic long and more yellow than orange. Their hair and eyes were similar, but whereas the man in the chair had a longer face, the man behind was a bit square. Do you know who I am, Oliver Frey? Asked the man in the chair, as he came to a stop near the bottom of the dais. You're Prince Doran Martell, said Oliver, licking his suddenly dry lips. Yes, the Prince of Dorne answered. What is it that the witch sent me, and for what purpose? Although it had taken some time for Oliver's memories to return, other parts remained elusive. Now, at Doran's question, words suddenly swam into focus, and he realized whatever spell he was under, it was not maliciously intended, but as a form of protection. Tease, the Lady Hermione sends this gift to House Martell, began Oliver, extending his shaking arms with the box out to the prince, to show that justice has been delivered. From behind the chair, the tall man stepped forward, glancing down at Doran, a deep frown on his face. Doran glanced back at the box, and the other man stepped down from the dais, almost jauntily, until he reached Oliver. If this is some trick, or if it will cast a spell on me, the man began haughtily, nothing will stop my brother and daughters from avenging me against this witch of yours, boy. Oliver shook his head. Not a trick, my prince. The man raised a single eyebrow and then peered into the box. He, like the guard outside the room, froze. Oberyn? Called Doran, his voice lightly concerned. Eyes flashing, Oberyn Martell grabbed the box and yanked it, and Oliver forward until their noses were nearly touching. Who gave you this? How? Tell me. Oberyn called Doran sharply, and then Arohata was there, separating the two. Oliver stumbled back, but free of the box, which Oberyn was clutching tightly, protectively, to his chest. What's gotten into you? Look. The Frey bastard has been given his head, snapped Oberyn, twirling around to face his brother, his yellowed tunic flaring dramatically behind him. It's him, the mountain. Then he hissed, the man who killed Aelia. Doran's dark eyes shifted from his brother to Oliver. Who gave you this? Lady Hermione, my prince, the teen said, taking a deep breath and trying to avoid shaking. She defeated Gregor Clegane in battle. Here, Oliver frowned. He couldn't remember how she did, only that it had happened, and she wanted to send his head to House Martell to let them know that justice was given for Princess Elia. There was silence. Then Doran's eyes narrowed. And what does the witch want? Oliver blinked. Nothing, my prince. Everyone wants something, muttered Oberyn, stepping back towards the chairs on the dais, still protectively clutching the box. No, my prince, said Oliver, beginning to feel comfortable. She just wants to do good, to help the North. She cares. There was a disbelieving glance between the two brothers. A silent communication that had Doran sighing. I see. Well, young Oliver Frey, you may stay the night as our guest, and then tomorrow be on your way. Do you have somewhere to go? Oliver nodded. Good, finished Prince Doran, turning to the first guard who escorted him in. Daenerys, show the boy to a room. Feed him. Wash his clothes. The guard nodded, bowed, and gestured for Oliver to come. The young Frey bowed as well, muttering, thanks my princes, and such, only turning his back on them just before he exited the throne room. His last look was of the two brothers, lowly muttering to themselves over the box. My last duty for the North is complete, the teen thought, sighing. There was a boat and a new adventure and future waiting for him, and he was eager to begin it. After all, only forward, never back. Oberyn's eyes were glittering in the light filtering through the stained glass. At last, O drawn, at last, the mountain is dead, and it wasn't by my hand. Doran shot his brother a look. No, not by yours. And perhaps thank the seven given your temper. Oberyn scowled. We should concern ourselves as to why the witch sent this to us, said Doran instead, drawing Oberyn's attention from the box. Does she seek an alliance? The younger asked. Doran shrugged, shifting in his chair. There was no mention of it. I find it strange that she would just give such a gift, though. Oberyn hummed in agreement. Perhaps my daughters could go on a trip, continued the man lightly, glancing deceptively away. His tone was light, kind. They had been at the Water Gardens for some time now, and they itched to go exploring once more. And where do you girls plan on visiting? Asked Doran knowingly. Oberyn grinned. Why, we've never been to the north. All that I've traveled and seen, and that is one place I have yet to visit. I should rectify that, don't you think, brother? There's a royal marriage to take place, reminded Doran, turning away to face forward. Deep in thought, the Martells should go and represent the house. Remind the Lannisters we too pay our debts. One debt is already paid, sighed Oberyn. Only one, replied Doran quietly. Not all, he nodded. Yes, I think a trip should be taken. King's Landing first, though. Prince Joffrey's marriage to Margaret Tyrell is soon, and we should be there. Oberyn paused, merely quivering, and then, once that happy event is done, finished Doran, do continue your adventures, brother. I look forward to what you discover. The grin his brother gave him was predatory.